Go, Rob. Come on.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Totally Tank, the tankiest podcast in Tankville.
Okay.
I'm Rob, by the way.
Yeah, he's Rob. Missing up the opening. I'm John. This is episode 70, recording and streaming live on 17 May 2025. The subject of this episode is the Sword of the Empire of Japan, the Type 97 Chiha. Now, if you haven't already, please head over to totallytank.net and sign up for the email list or the RSS feed so we can let you know about updates without having to beg permission from the fascist oligarchs who own social media.
Yeah.
Also, if you like the show, and for God's sake, then why not smash those like and subscribe buttons and leave positive reviews.
7 stars. All right, names. Well, okay, so we've got the Type 97, but like we experienced with the Type 10 Japanese tank and the various American tanks, the Type 97 medium tank with the Type 97 57mm tank gun and the 2 or 3 Type 97 7.7mm heavy tank machine guns should not be confused with the Type 97 tankette or the Type 97 aircraft machine gun as mounted on the Zero, or the Type 97 automatic anti-tank rifle, the grenade, the sniper rifle, the 81mm mortar, the 90mm mortar, the 150mm mortar, the torpedo, the lightweight torpedo, the recon aircraft, the fighter aircraft, or the flying boat. And that's ignoring the Chinese rifle, the infantry fighting vehicle, and the shotgun. But
okay, sorry, you're about to answer this. Go on.
But why 97? It was numbered 97 as the abbreviation of the imperial year 2597, based on the legendary foundation of the Japan by Emperor Jimmu in 660 BC, which equates to 1937 in the Gregorian calendar. But there were 2 versions of the tank, and they were called the Type 97 Chiha, medium tank number 3, or the also known as the, John, I'm going to let you do this one.
The Kunana Shiki Chu Sencha Chiha.
See, I'll let him do all the foreign pronunciations because I only speak Australian and foreign.
I don't necessarily do them well, but I do them with conviction.
Better than I would.
I just want to quickly note, we've got folks in the comments, Alan Desmond, our old friend of the show.
John Choller.
We've got James Golden. We've got Jonas Golden. Sorry, mate. And John Scholler. Hello from Atlanta. All right. So, folks, thank you so much for joining the show. In very exciting news for us, we are very close to crossing the 4,000 watch hours in a year to monetize on YouTube. And pretty much the viewing of this episode is what's going to kick us over the cliff. So,
yay!
You're adding 1,000 hours of people watching Kurt from Ozarma because he's really popular.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
All right. So it's also known as the Type 97/57. All right. And then we get on to the Type 97 Kai, which means improved, or the, John?
Kunana Shiki Shinhoto Chu Shensha Chiha or Shinhoto. Mostly Shinhoto I've seen used a lot, and that's the main one.
Which means new turret, Chinha, or simply the Type 97/47. All right, and we get into the wonderful stats. So of our Type 97 Chiha, it's a medium tank, even though it's only 15 tons, if that. Produced from 1938 to 1943. They built around 2,200 with 1,160 Chihas and around 930 Type 97 Shinhotos. It started out at 14.3 tons and went up to 15.2 tons.
I think on that, it's really important to note the Japanese called this a medium tank because for them it was the middle of their weight range. To anyone else, this really was a light tank. And I think the mistaking it for a medium, a Western medium, is part of why it's underappreciated for what it achieved and what it was.
Yeah, I mean, their light tanks were under 7 tons because weight limits of what they were trying to do and the roads and the bridges they were trying to cross. So as we discussed in the Type 10 episode, the Japan has 7,000 bridges, and if you want to be, and back then in the 1930s, if you want to be driving over those bridges, there's a lot of wood, not a lot of reinforced concrete, and so your weight limits are very limited. And guess what? In China at that stage, there was even fewer roads and fewer bridges, so you really want something light to be able to get around.
But I do find we've got some archival footage playing in the background behind us for those on the video feed, and it'll be up on the website, totallytank.net, for those who are just listening in audio. Now, this is a highly edited version, just the tank bits. At the halftime show, there'll be a more complete version. There's some really fun stuff I've pulled out of this show in War Memorial Archives on this. With Japanese people, it looks like a medium tank is the other thing because it's a huge tank for very small Japanese people.
The average height there, I remember reading, was 1.6 meters, which I think is about 5'7" or something like that for a Japanese soldier. So,
yeah.
Anyway. But then again, everybody's coming out of the Great Depression, so everybody's underweight and grew up malnourished, and so the world was much shorter and thinner back in the 40s. And that's our excuse for being big, strong Australian.
There is that.
And people these days, because we're not overweight. Yeah, we are. Anyway, length 5.5 meters, 2.3 meters wide, and 2.2 meters high. So quite low. Crew of 5, but regularly dropped to 4 by leaving out the loader as the turret was too cramped and the rounds were small enough for the commander to load easily. Armour, very thin. All right, 8 millimeters most places, 25 millimeters on the turret, the front of the turret and the gun mantlet. Sometimes they added another 20 millimeters welded onto the front of the turret. So,
but it's fair to say this armour is paper thin. This is, FT kind of
you're bouncing 50 cal rounds, but not anti-tank rounds.
We wouldn't want to bounce too many 50 cal rounds either.
No, you wouldn't want that. The main armament of the Chinha was the 57 millimeter gun, which that was later replaced with the 47 millimeter anti-tank gun, which became the Shinhoto variant.
Which basically, they fought the Soviets at, we always talk about Nomahan because it's unbelievably important.
Or Kalkengol.
Or Kalkengol, same battle. So at Nomahan, the Japanese went in there with a bigger caliber, high explosive lobbing cannon. And having to fight Soviet armour, they said, you know what, we want a high-velocity, long-range cannon. Thank you very much.
Well, I mean, the tank was designed for infantry support. That's why it had the 57 millimeter gun, because that was lobbing out HE rounds for infantry support.
But the experience of fighting the Soviets made them think, no. And the thing with the 47 millimeter gun that they went to, which was a much longer barrel and a higher velocity, it did still have a moderately useful high explosive round. So they gained a lot more armour penetration, and they were still reasonably happy with the high explosive. It was something like 91 grams of high explosive, which doesn't seem like a lot, but they seemed happy with it.
All right, and welcome to Philippine Dreams and Obliteron. Thanks for joining in. All right, it also had secondary armaments of 2 7.7 millimeter Type 97 heavy tank machine guns. There was a possibility of having a third on a ring mount on the cupola. Now, I've only ever saw that in models, never actually any footage of, there's probably one right behind us in the video, but I haven't seen it. I have seen the video, but I haven't seen the anti-aircraft guns mounted on top for use by the commander. But so I wasn't sure if that was just a modelling thing or if they actually did it. So who knows?
I think it was also something they planned for. And the other thing is that you'll see in the footage, particularly the earlier variant had the radio antenna around the top of the turret, which the Russians also did. And that seems to be something that they, obviously, as radio technology developed, the need to have that big antenna went away. So it also went away.
Yeah. And whether or not they actually had a radio fitted. You'd think you'd only have that railing if they had, I don't know.
You also don't want to advertise that you're the radio tank. That's a bad tank to be in.
Yeah. All right, the engine was a Mitsubishi air-cooled V12 diesel engine.
Now let's just...
with 170 horsepower.
Let's just dwell on this for a second, because they did the similar thing with the Hargo. This was bigger. But obviously the Americans had air-cooled petrol engines in their tanks because they were aircraft engines. The advantage of air cooling is you remove an enormous amount of vulnerability. You also add a lot of problems with overheating because air cooling isn't as good as liquid cooling. But to be able to build a air-cooled diesel engine able to throw 170 horsepower was a fair achievement by the Japanese and made this tank extremely useful and rugged and reliable and not prone to stopping for minor damage.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a bit later. Now, the bell crank suspension was quite a special thing that nobody else was using. And
the thing with bell crank, and again, the Japanese use this in the Type 95, the Hargo, which is the archetypal Japanese tank in most people's minds, a much smaller, lighter vehicle. Bell crank is very robust, very easy to repair, fully external to the tank. It's pretty agricultural. It's not a very smooth ride, but it fell into the category of being good enough and throw in there, easy to maintain, not consuming interior volume. And I think it was still a successful choice for them here.
Oh, good. Operational range of 210 kilometres with a maximum speed of 38 kilometres an hour. Now, it's not to be confused with the Type 97 tankette, which was produced from 1937 to 1944, 616 built, 4.7 tonnes, 3.6 metres long, 1.8 metres wide, and 1.9 metres high.
So that's the smaller Type 97, not the one we're talking about.
Now, there's a question is, when's a tankette and not a tank? They say that one of the definitions I read was that a tankette has a machine gun, not a tank gun. Well,
Panzer II.
The
M2?
TK had a 37mm gun. It could also be fitted with just the 7.7mm gun because they were running out of 37mm guns at some stage. But it was basically, they're saying that these things are shorter, smaller, and used in reconnaissance roles, and that's what makes them a tankette rather than a tank.
Look, as with everything, it's a very blurry description, and a tankette of today would be bigger and harder than a tank of, say, 1916.
The German Weasel is a freaking great little tankette.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Brett Parker's joined us. Hello, Brett.
Yeah. Crew of two was just the commander and the driver. Armour only 4 to 16 millimeters. As I said, 37mm gun or a machine gun.
That's not a tankette to me, but let's not get too much.
Right. 4-cylinder diesel with 65 horsepower. Two-wheel bogie suspension, and with an operational range of 250 kilometres and maximum speed of 42 kilometres. The other thing with the engine. No, hang on, I'll come back to it later.
Okay.
All right. Design and development. Okay, now we're back to the Chiha. In 1935, the Imperial Japanese Army reviewed their Type 89 Ego tank and decided it was too slow for the large area of China and did not suit their requirements for motorized warfare. Seeking alternatives, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries delivered a prototype Chiha in April 1937 with a 57mm infantry support gun. Osaka Arsenal was also in the process of delivering their lighter, cheaper alternative, the Chi-Ni, but with the restart of hostilities in China in 1937, budgetary limitations were removed and the Chi-Ha was ordered into production.
I do love the idea that the Japanese are like, oh, maybe we should get the crap one because it's cheaper. And then they're like, nope, they're going to war. They get the good one. Get the good one.
Remember, this is all the competition between the Navy and the Army it was still a thing. It hadn't really been decided by the loss at Kalkangol. So it really was, but it was still there. The competition for resources was huge.
But when we talk about competition between the Army and the Navy in pre-war Japan, we're not talking about getting upset if the football team loses. We're not talking about stabbing each other in the back in cabinet meetings. We're talking about literal stabbings.
In the streets. In the streets.
They were killing each other.
There was murders in the streets by politicians, by soldiers, to make sure that their choices were getting made. How soon do you think we'll be seeing that again, eh?
Look,
anyway, we'll get into that.
Fascists just tend to violence, so I think it's a matter of time before American cabinet members start doing some very strange things. They're already doing some very strange things.
I mean, Russia, they just have this
fall out of window.
Fall out of windows. But the window is locked. Well, you managed it. Anyway, the design relied heavily on the Type 95 Hago, such as the set of 12 buttons for the commander to press that lit up a console light telling the driver what to do, as there were no internal communications.
It's one of those things when you've got a society built on ideograms, the idea of having 12 lights and having to know what each of them means, it makes more sense, when you've got to memorize thousands of kanji to read.
But they literally had telephone companies, the wonderful Fujitsu, Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan company come together to build telephones. Why weren't they installing those?
I love Fuji cameras though. Anyway,
Fujitsu.
Yeah,
Fuji.
I thought they were related. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, suspension was the bell crank system designed for easy maintenance, not comfort, as John was saying. The long bolted hull was low and narrow, making it less manoeuvrable but faster, more stable and more difficult to hit. The gun had a 10-degree traverse in the turret, and elevation was controlled by the gunner using a shoulder mount.
And it's worth noting this is a quite rare tank where the turret is not central.
No, yes, it was offset, as you'll see in the videos as we watch them.
And also when we get to the halftime video, and again, if you're listening to this on the podcast, totallytank.net, we will have it available there.
Yes, I agree. Tasman Potential History has a good video on the inside of the Type 97 as introduced by the Chieftain. That was very nice of him.
Well, quickly while we're talking about the interiors, there's a reason why every museum in the world that's got one of these hasn't got it up and running yet, despite the fact they think the air-cooled diesel would be very easy to get moving again. because the Japanese, to deal with the fire hazards and the spalling hazards, installed asbestos spalling curtains throughout. So they're basically little workplace hazards that no one wants to open.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. All right. So the gunner, while the traverse inside the tank was manual traverse, so you wind your little handle around as the tank turns. Now, I don't think we've actually addressed the machine guns. It had two machine guns, one for the bow gunner in the hull and one to the rear of the turret for the loader to operate. Now, I
do like the idea of the rear-mounted machine gun. I mean, as a concept, if the infantry is sneaking up behind you, you just got them. You've got them, Rob. You don't have to swing the turret around. You just got them.
But if you want to be hosing down an area with the...
It should be a beaten zone, yeah.
with two machine guns, then your main gun is pointing the wrong direction. Yeah, so...
But also, you can, in theory, do the old switcheroo so that...
But if you've got a manual traverse turret, it is so slow that
But if you're not engaging enemy armour or strong points, then I imagine you drive with the machine gun pointing forward. The coaxial machine gun won the competition, but I can see the glory of the idea.
The loader has such limited visibility to the rear of the tank anyway that he's not going to see anything sneaking up, anybody sneaking up from in the jungle behind him anyway. So I guess they weren't always fighting in jungle. They were fighting in a lot of China, which is probably the main place.
Tasman in the chat has noted the Japanese burned all the technical manuals at the end of the war.
And I'll get to that.
Which is worth noting, but it's also worth noting that there was significant post-war use, particularly in China. So the lack of manuals it's a pretty simple tank to operate. It's a very simple, robust tank in many ways, but
So the gunner would hold like some of the British tanks, the gunner had a shoulder mount, whereby the commander or the gunner would traverse the turret onto the target or near the target, and he could elevate the gun by moving his shoulder up and down, squats and lunges, there you go. And then he had 10 degrees of movement inside the gun mantlet to be able to move the gun around more precisely.
I reckon you could have a business model getting people doing squats and lunges with a 3-ton cannon on their shoulders.
I think it was less than 1 ton.
Was it? I mean, I was just making that number up.
Yeah, but and look, that's why Japanese companies start each morning with calisthenics and whatever.
True. Getting ready for aiming their tank guns.
All right, the engine was the revolutionary, being a V12 air-cooled diesel engine putting out 170 horsepower. That's what I was going to say before. So after seeing the Japanese tanks at Khalkhin, the Russians said, this diesel thing's a good idea, just remember that. And that's why they started building diesel engines rather than the petrol engines that were going up in flames on the BTs.
I mean, let's not overemphasize that too much, because the Kharkiv V2, I think, was 1938 designed, so it was adoption of that was driven by the results of Nomahan and not the development. But it definitely helped, and I'm pretty sure Zhukov made some big points in his letters home saying we need to move to diesel on these tanks. I'm sick of them catching fire.
Brett, no, with the rear MGs for from the Soviet tanks, basically it was two ideas coming out at the same time.
But between the BT and the Chi-Ha fighting each other at Khalkhin, it was fascinating how similar those tanks actually were.
Yeah, but I think it was the KVs that had the rear machine gun.
Yes, yeah. Medi's saying he's surprised that the Japanese didn't fit a bayonet to
How do you know they didn't?
Yeah.
All right? Were you there? All right, so the engine proved sturdy enough to be produced until 1943.
Oh, it's a little masterpiece of design, but anyone who's driven a Mitsubishi knows they make good vehicles.
Now, talking about the burning of material of documentation, I haven't seen any counts of poor reliability or complex maintainability for the Type 97. And remember, this is pre-war Japan, where their industrialization was based on the Zaibatsu, where the family-owned corporations controlled everything in the process, and not the post-war rebuilding of Japan as an industrial powerhouse guided by the quality-controlled assembly line industrial process of American W. Edwards Deming.
Which is basically, the US Army Corps of Engineers went into post-war Japan and said, we are going to use the most modern ideas to rebuild Japanese industry. And Japan benefited from that enormously, and unfortunately, America was not willing to listen to the US Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh,
So,
Deming's gone in there. He's a hero in Japan, and he's gone back to America. And nobody's remembered who he was until the 80s.
And they're like, oh, well, we're doing fine. We don't need your advice.
This guy's transformed Japan's bloody industry and made them a powerhouse, and he's gone back to America. And
now, pre-war Japan didn't necessarily make bad things.
No.
It made some things badly.
They were very good at making warships.
Yeah, but
that was where the concentration and focus was on.
Effort was on, yeah. But they had terrible yields on the things they produced. So, like with their vacuum tubes, 9 out of 10 that they made, they'd have to throw away. And the quality assurance that the Americans brought to them, the Japanese products are just known for reliability now in a way that even the Germans are slightly envious of. Yeah.
Tasman's saying his first car was a Dado 1000, which is, that was a...
Brett's talking about the old Sigmas. That's really going back in the day. Oh, God, what was this? My dad used to drive Magnus and Veratas, and we even had a Mitsubishi van back in the 80s. Yes, anyway.
Yeah. All right, the placement and access to the engine is listed as being a bit tricky to work on, but that's all I've got to... That's all I've come across. But it's also said that the Mitsubishi engine was a very good design with no belts of any kind being found.
Oh, geez, that would really make those engines better.
Yeah, and everything being run off drive shafts, including the air cooling fans mounted on either side of the engine.
Now, I just want to quickly touch on, these days, we are used to cars being very reliable. But most people watching this podcast are old enough to remember it used to be, if you had
back in my day,
if your parents had a dinner party, so let's throw it back into the 80s, it was not unusual for someone to be late because they had car trouble. And that is unthinkable today. And that's how these particularly...
that's why they had to throw all the keys into a jumble at the end.
Yes, that's why they had to do that, Rob, yeah. But, it's synthetic hoses have had a lot to do with that because rubber hoses cracked and split all the freaking time. But also a lot of Japanese ideas with building with an idea for elegant failure so as that they wear down, they remain useful. Anyway, and this looks like it was very much a design built to be very hard to stop. Yeah.
And it's possible that any documentation of mechanics cursing the tanks that were destroyed or just not translated, and so we don't know. So that's another big aspect, is that if you are not fluent in hiragana, kanji, whatever, and it's hard to document, take that documentation and put it in and transfer it across to English.
Yeah, I've also got a bit of a weird thing when you've got a writing system that relies on a scholarly class. Tank mechanics are unlikely to be. I'm not saying they're illiterate, but I'm not saying they're particularly big writers or readers. So you're possibly losing some stuff that in a more argot trading language like we use, just stuff gets noted down a lot more. But yeah.
All right. In regards to the crew, as I said, I've seen descriptions that it was a 4-person crew with the commander as the loader and another with the commander as the gunner. But I feel it was actually a 5-person crew as the documentation with pictures from the time show. Otherwise, who crews that rear MG? Because
it's the loader. But who's the loader? Yeah,
but if the loader, because the commander's on the right-hand side of the turret as facing forwards, and the gun is on the left-hand, the rear MG is on the left-hand side, and the gunner is, anyway.
Also, it's a very well-appointed cupola for a 1930s design. It could easily be something you'd see in later war designs.
It'd be nice to have some internal comms, but anyway. And the commander with a radio.
That's a whole. Those are other different things, but I'm just saying it's a very pronounced cupola for a 1930s design.
Yeah, it's better than any of the one-person turret bloody French tanks at any rate.
Well, yeah.
All right. Yes, the loader may have been dropped from the cramped interior of the tank, where the bow gunner was right in front of the gunner. So when you see the diagrams of how the crew was placed, the bow gunner was right in front of the gunner, and the loader was right behind the gunner. So the three of them were in a very cramped space. Now, the bow gunner obviously isn't in the turret, and so when the turret's turning, he doesn't have to move, but the other two do have to move. So that makes it a little bit cramped.
Now, Rob, we've got a poll going.
Yeah.
And we'll refer back to this throughout the show. So
you people haven't been reading your history. Come on.
We're not very happy with
G-Hart was a great tank for its time. Only 29%. Rubbish always. Ooh,
71%.
71%.
Wait till we get to the operational history. You're going to regret your vote and wish you could take it back. Anyway.
10
all right.
tanks. That's all it takes to defeat the British.
Yeah.
We'll get
all
to
right.
that.
Let's
Anyway,
keep going.
the cramped interior of the tank, where the bow gunner was right in front of the gunner and the loader was right behind the gunner, it appears the gunner and commander had folding seats attached to the turret in diagrams, but none remain from the interiors I've found online. If they weren't in their seats and the loader didn't have a seat, they would have to step around the inside of the tank as there was no turret basket, stepping over the drive shaft that goes down the middle and around the engine that protruded into the turret. But as it was a hand crank traverse, they wouldn't have to move too fast because you couldn't traverse that fast. There is some internet speculation that later 1943 models had an electric traverse turret rather than a hand crank, but there was nothing definite on that, and we haven't actually seen anything like that.
I've not heard that. Yeah.
As I said, it was a comment, and thought, is that real? I'll throw it out there just in case somebody else knows.
Look, I'm willing to bet there was a design drawing of a concept, and I wouldn't know if it was built, but it doesn't seem to come up much in any other documentation. Alan is asking, is the ring around the cupola an antenna or a bomber bar? It is an antenna.
But it was also used as for
hanging on
for any infantry mounted on the back of the tank.
But as we did discuss this earlier, basically the wavelengths that the radios were using in the 1930s that needed that really big antenna around the top, they found more efficient ways to do that.
Yeah, so when the Chihoto got rid of that and mounted antennas on the rear.
Right. Mehdi's asking about the rear-facing machine gun when the cannon was in use. I'm pretty sure it's either or. I don't think you could use them both at the same time.
Yeah, you could, because if the
recoil.
No, because it was offset. So
okay. Yeah, there you go, Mehdi.
They went directly behind each other. So the machine gun was
it did point out at a slightly different angle as well. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't direct. They went directly behind each other.
So coming up at half time, we've got a British identification video for this tank, which hilariously misidentifies the tank.
And just remember, their views on what they're saying, their racist views from the 1940s is not our views from today.
But it does talk about the offsetting of all the... It's some really clever stuff in this turret design, how they have offset things so they're not necessarily clashing with each other. I still don't think you'd particularly want to be firing the main gun while you're engaging enemy infantry in the rear, but that's a whole other thing.
The Chiha had roof hatches for the driver and the bow gunner, but they were removed from the Shinhoto, so they had to enter and exit via the turret.
That must have been very popular.
Radios...
And that's sarcasm. That was not popular at all.
Radios in the early to mid-war were only issued to company and platoon commanders. In late war, they attempted to give the radios to all the tanks, but did not manage to achieve that because lots of them are out on various islands that you couldn't get to because the Americans were sinking anything going that way. Lots of asbestos, so restoring them is a bit precarious. Visibility from inside was pretty limited. With most positions limited to a telescopic lens for the gunner and the loader on the rear MG and the bow gun.
What does the loader need a periscope for?
Telescope for he's got his rear gun.
Oh, for his rear MG. Okay, all right. Because I'm thinking he just has to pick up shells and put them in the breech. He doesn't need to see outside.
No, he's manning a gun, mate. All right. And the bow gunner, who also had one vision slit to the left and a pistol port. So there was actually a couple of pistol ports scattered around the tank. The driver had one vision block and two vision slits. And again, these are 3 mil wide slits in the armour of the tank. So how you went with that. Anyway, the commander had a periscope and 6 vision blocks in the cupola. So he could see out all around the place.
It was a very advanced cupola for 1937.
It still wasn't great visibility.
I'm not saying it was great. I'm just saying for 1937, there aren't a lot of tanks with that much effort put into the commander's cupola. Yeah. Normally they would think, he'll just stand up and encourage the troops.
All right, the Type 97 7.7mm heavy tank machine gun used 20-round clips. And as I said before, I've seen modelling of them with an external anti-aircraft machine gun, but no footage or makes me wonder if it's true. In the 1930s, Japan decided not to build an army to fight European armies when Asia was their goal. Obviously.
Good thinking.
Because
good priority.
I mean, if you're building an army to take on the Europeans, you've got a long way to go to get there. But still far. It's still pretty smart. So they built tanks for fighting in China that had to contend with the lack of roads, no heavy load-bearing bridges, narrow gauge railways, meant it was difficult to move them. Plus a very limited heavy industrial base in Japan, except for warships, and limited shipping options for tanks. So they only had so many roll-on, roll-off ferries type things. So it was not a case of they could ship them around easily. They just didn't have that much shipping that could take tanks and with the cranes to be able to load them on and off. There was also the issue of having low driving capable population, because most Japanese...
Germans had this problem too. Yep.
Most Japanese walked, or actually most of them walked, actually.
Yeah. Very few had horses.
Or caught trains, meaning the manpower pool for logistics, driving trucks and tank drivers, was very limited. So you had the contention of who do you want your the people who could driving trucks and getting the petrol and ammo to where it needs to be, or do you want them driving tanks and actually fighting the battles? And you couldn't do both. And I mean, yes, training people up as soldiers was very, very possible, and they did it, but it was still meant that you took more time and they had a lower skill base, as it was.
Yeah, but I mean, it's actually a really big thing. Like, obviously, the US in particular had a enormous number of people coming into the workforce who...
The Model T made sure that there was a lot of people who could drive in America.
Yeah.
Which is why nowadays they're making it all game controllers for the driver.
Yeah, Xbox controllers for everything. But it does make you suddenly think. It's like, how long does it take to train someone to drive competently? I would argue maybe even 6 months. And in military training pipelines, 6 months is enormous.
You want 3 months to be able to march in a straight line, pick up a rifle, fire a rifle, and follow basic orders of stop, go, stop, go, stop, go.
Yeah.
And that takes you 3 months. That said, in Japan there was a big push to build tanks and put together combined armoured brigades with tanks, artillery, infantry, reconnaissance engineers working together. The Wanaka detachment was a combined arms force that took part in the Battle of Shushu.
Well done. That was pretty good.
Pretty good, in May 1938, with decisive results for the Japanese. However, the Imperial Japanese Army leadership, as in General Tojo, did not understand combined arms, and the brigades were then dispersed to concentrate on infantry, with tanks only to provide support.
Now, it's easy to say. Everyone in the world had these same concepts floating around, and then they said, this is going to be really expensive, and we can only afford a couple of these, or we could just have lots more of what we've always done. And it's very hard from our high altitude and many years removed to say who was right, because the guys saying, let's go the really expensive thing, weren't necessarily right. But, at this point, it seems like, they should have done more of that. Yeah.
All right. From 1942, armoured divisions were put together to re-establish combined arms forces. Whilst they existed on paper and had doctrine, they were not effectively used as a cohesive force except during Operation Ichigo in 1944. All right. Now we get on to the operators. Imperial Japan, what a surprise. The People's Republic of China. That's the communists. The Republic of China, that's the nationalists. And probably the Indonesian nationalists. They definitely used a Type 97 tankette, and there were Type 97 Chihas on the islands as well, and one can be found in the memorial at Museum, John?
Brawijaya, Malang.
There you go. But there is nothing specifically listed that the Chihas were used by the Indonesians against the Dutch. Now, it's interesting that the Dutch asked the Brits to control the colony straight after the war until they could get themselves sorted out. And the Brits then got the Japanese soldiers to keep the islands under control until they can get more Indian soldiers over there to take over Indonesia.
And you then get Australia's very complicated relationship with Indonesia coming out of this, where we were like, no, we don't want the Japanese troops running in Indonesia. And there was a fair bit of pushing and shoving around that period, but that is outside the scope of this podcast. So.
All right. The conflicts, the Second Sino-Japanese War, which was the Chiha was very effective to have. It was very effective to have a tank facing off against warlords of dubious quality.
I just want to quickly speak out in defence of the Chinese warlords of the 1920s. Many of them were dubious, and many of them were absolutely crap. But there were also some who were trying to drag their own particular region of China into the future in huge ways. Some of the first electrified cities in the world were Chinese warlord cities in the 1920s. Some of the first mass public transport systems that they were building. So, and they were hiring huge numbers of German mercenaries to run their armies, and then were very effective.
I was about to say there's a reason why you see a lot of videos or film of Chinese troops dressed like German soldiers.
Sure, but they were just saying, who's the best in the world? Where's there a bunch of soldiers lying around wanting a paycheck? And they said, Germany. Hey! The warlords were definitely of enormously variable quality, I would say, but there were some provinces that were extremely well run by their warlords and were just avoided by everyone for a very long time. Yeah.
All right. Then we get to the Soviet-Japanese border conflicts.
Khalkhin-Gol, Nomahan.
Yep. Then we get to World War II itself. Then the Soviet-Japanese War, which was from the 8th of August to the 23rd of August, 1945, which was 3 months after VE Day, as Stalin said he was not going to get involved in Japan until 3 months after Europe was won. And he stuck to his word. Wow, what a surprise. As I said,
to the absolute letter of it.
Yep. As I said before, possibly the Indonesian National Revolution of 1947, the Chinese Civil War. Both sides had tanks handed over from surrendering Japanese units at the end of the war, and the Korean War there were Chihars used by PLA volunteer units and not the North Koreans themselves.
So the North Koreans had good Soviet armour and the PLA volunteer units had to use hand-me-down Japanese ones, which is quite an interesting way to think about how that rolled out. Another thing that's well worth noting is that PLA volunteer force that, swept MacArthur's troops aside late in the war.
7 million of them, whatever it was.
Crossing over the Yalu River. If you wanted your grandchildren today to be senior cadres in the Chinese government, it really helped to be in that force. But, yeah. So, Rob, battles of note.
Battles of note.
You're starting with Khalkhin-Gol. That's a good one.
I just didn't have enough documentation on the Chinese things to be able to go into those. I'm sorry. It was my lack of ability in finding useful battles in China, whereas it was just running over things.
Yeah, it's worth noting, though, that this was a time of extremely poor record-keeping in China because they had a lot going on.
Yeah. Anyway, so Khalkhin-Gol, August 39. Well, we know from our BT episode that the Japanese tanks did not fare well. There were only 4 Type 97s in the 3rd Tank Regiment of the Japanese, and the first to die was the command tank, getting stuck in a tank trap and then bursting into flames when shot by Soviet BTs.
I mean, to be fair to it got hit like 20 times before it finally exploded. Considering the lightness of the armour, I was surprised at the durability of it.
And the fact that it was diesel, and so
it didn't catch fire.
Bursting into flame took a while. Anyway, this defeat directly led to the implementation of the 47mm Type 1 gun, anti-tank gun being installed in the Chiha Shinhoto, which still took them a bit of time to get there because it was 2 years later before they started.
Yeah, and only half of them had the longer gun. And in some of the late battles, I think there was like 1 Shinhoto and 10 earlier modelled Chihas. So the infantry support Chiha with the bigger caliber high explosive round was very important throughout the war. It wasn't just they said this is a better design and moved everything over to it.
Yeah. Now we get to the fun parts. The Battle of Jitra. All right. So Northern Malaya, 9th of December 1941. So 2 days after Pearl Harbor and 1 day after the Japanese have declared war on things. The Indian 11th Infantry Division. So while we say it's an Indian division, it's still Brits and Indian force and troops make up the thing.
It was a division.
One battalion of... one brigade of Englishmen, 2 brigades of Indians.
Yeah, but to say it's a Indian division means it's a division of the British Empire in India with an enormous number of, particularly in the officer class.
No, they're all led by Brits.
Yeah.
By white guys.
And, a significant number of Indians did fight for the Japanese because, they had very mixed feelings about the British with very good reason.
Yeah. Anyway, we've discussed that, I think, in other episodes. Anyway, it was stationed just across the Thai border, awaiting orders to cross over into Thailand to stop any Japanese forces landing as part of Operation Matador. They'd been kept on notice for 24 hours, and then the operation was called off, and the division was eventually ordered to march back to Jitra in northern Malaya and dig in monsoon rain. Unable to complete their defensive positions and spread out over a 12-mile front, the Japanese were able to defeat the 11th Division in detail with 2 battalions of infantry and a company of tanks, 10 Type 97 mediums and 5 Type 95 lights. 10 tanks. And then they moved That's all it took to defeat a division.
If you don't have any anti-tank weapons, 10 tanks is a really big problem.
10 tanks, that's all it took to... They had anti-tank weapons, so they just did not deploy them well.
Good anti-tank weapons.
And they did not... Brett Parker's talking about Valentine's. Well,
yeah, we're getting there, Brett. We're there, Brett.
We're getting there. Right. As they moved south out of Thailand over the next 24 hours, the Chinha proved capable of fending off thick jungle and seemingly impassable terrain, as they were the key to victory, along with the bicycles. The bicycles meant they could keep up with the tanks.
Now... just want to quickly note with the bicycles, the plan with the bicycles that worked was they didn't take the bicycles with them. They stole all the bicycles
from the Thais.
The Thais and the Malaysians.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to quickly note is that in the archival video that we've got playing, there's a lot of Chihas bulldozing trees. I always thought that was just a game thing. I always thought you'd be really stupid to drive your tank into a tree, but apparently it's something they did and it worked really well, and they knock over trees and roll straight over the top.
Well, it depends on your trees and your trains.
Depends on the tree a lot. I always thought because the root bowl would come up under your tank and you could get bogged on it, but I guess it just sort of flicks you forwards. So there you go.
Jungle trees might just not have the deeper roots or something.
Medi's asking, did the Japanese ever use their armour as a large force? Generally not, but there was one occasion they definitely did, and we will get to that.
That's right. Which was a pretty good start for the Japanese campaign in Malaya. Then we get to
It was a good start, it just got better.
Then we get to Slim River, which was in central Malaya. So basically, the Brits have lost northern Malaya and they've fallen back to Slim River and set up so the 4th of January, 1942, with thick mountains on one side and jungle and swamp on the other, a narrow 4-mile corridor leading to the bridge over the Slim River was seen as the next best defensive position for the Commonwealth to halt the Japanese advance from the north. 2 brigades of infantry were moved in to set up defensive positions. They had no tanks. They had a platoon of armoured cars and armed with Boys anti-tank rifles, 15 anti-tank guns, 3 dozen anti-tank mines, and plenty of artillery.
3 dozen anti-tank mines is not enough.
No.
You need hundreds. Hundreds!
So on the 7th of January 1942, moving down the trunk road, which is basically the road cleared in this 4-mile area, the Imperial Japanese Army contacted the leading defenders. Once realising this was the main force and not just a delaying position, the Japanese attempted to traverse through the jungle and outflank the Commonwealth forces, as they'd been doing everywhere else. But they found the going slower than they liked, and so the tank commander suggested a blitz on the Commonwealth forces, breaking through them and taking the Slim River Bridge before it could be blown. So basically, he said, "Boss, I reckon I can do this." And guess what?
I just want to note, it suddenly becomes Commonwealth forces when the British are losing. It's always British Empire this, British Empire that. When we lose, it's like, it's the Australians and the Indians, it's their fault.
That was my editorial choice. Just make sure it wasn't. So we're just saying British because of the Indians involved in the forces. All right.
I'm just saying we're on 15 concurrent viewers, which is a record for us as well. Good work, folks. We're going to hit that monetization. All
right. So anyway, the tank commander, he took a company of 10 Type 97s and 5 Type 95s, so 10 mediums and 5 lights on the initial advance. And after success in breaking through the first Commonwealth regiment and losing 4 tanks to mines and anti-tank rifles, Molotov cocktails launched onto the tanks had no effect, which is a bit sad for everybody.
I would have to have seen how exactly they did that, because Molotovs can stop tanks, but you've got to get it into the air intakes.
Anyway, he was then, once he'd gone through the first regiment, he was then reinforced with another 2 companies of tanks, and they continued to sweep through the disorganised Commonwealth forces, many of whom were marching in column on the road to the front when the Japanese tanks came upon them.
That's a bad way to
That's a bad way to... saying, it's... oh my goodness, there's a Japanese tank. Anyway... including the anti-tank forces that might have been able to stop them. When they got to the Slim River Bridge, an anti-air battery of Bofors tried to stop them, but their flak rounds had no effect. And so, like the British tanks with no HE, the anti-air had no anti-tank.
I would still like to see what exactly they did there with those HE, because even Bofors 40mm with HE should be able to cause some problems for the very thin armour on these tanks.
They just splattered off the side. So
I think they might have just run. I'm not sure they put up a great opposition.
Anyway.
You see what a Bradley with a 30mm did to a T-72, for God's sake?
Anyway, so they fired at them, but they had, even though the rounds are the same size, they had no anti-tanks, so it just bounced off. So the Japanese took the bridge and went on for another 2 miles before running into the regimental artillery, who had their 25-pounder guns already set up. And they were finally able to dissuade the Japanese from continuing to advance.
25-pounders have a very good anti-tank, and these are not very well armoured tanks.
Oh, they lost a few artillery pieces first, but they eventually said, "Oh, hang on a second, we can just point these things at them and they'll go away."
Well, you've got to use you've got to have the right ammunition. I don't even know if they had the right ammunition available, but you'd like to think divisional arty could stop what is functionally regimental arty could stop what is fundamentally a very light tank.
All right, so in all this, the Japanese had lost 6 tanks and captured 4,000 men, plus 2 brigades of equipment. This loss of Central Malaya hastened the British withdrawal to Singapore and their final capitulation. And just think what could have been done if 50 of the 259 Valentines sent to Russia could have been diverted to Malaya after 8th of December 1941.
I was thinking...
Valentines would have just... Yeah, anyway.
Valentines would have been very useful. I mean, the limitations of the 2-pounder gun, that if they'd actually had a dual-purpose gun in any event.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
but it would definitely stop the Japanese armour, absolutely, and the machine guns would have been useful. I did even think, obviously, Matildas were heavily in use elsewhere, but, a Matilda would have... The Japanese would have had no answer to it.
Even the Valentine, the round wouldn't have gone through the Valentine, and the Valentine's 2-pounder would have sorted all that out.
Yeah, we've never seen the matchup. I'd be interested to see how that long-barreled 47 would have gone against a Valentine. That would be interesting. I don't know the answer.
I don't think it would have done anything to it. I think it would have been quite fine with against that. And 50 Valentines. Because as I was saying, they weren't shipping a lot of Matildas to Russia at that stage, but they were shipping a lot of Valentines. And
the whole Malaya campaign was a case of what if, and the Japanese just went with, we're doing this now, we're not waiting to find out what if. And
got inside the OODA loop.
That's very important. The Malayan campaign is grossly misunderstood, particularly in Australia. But the thing you need to remember is the
10 tanks.
10 tanks would have made a difference, but the thing you need to remember is that it was a fleet base. It was designed for a fleet to operate from. Once the fleet was sunk, there was no purpose for the base to exist. And also, if the fleet had been properly operational, stopping the Japanese making flanking advances down the coast, then the Japanese would have found things a lot tougher. But, as it was, the main issue was that the French had been flipped in the war, and the Royal Navy was grossly overextended, and we get into the whole collapse of British power in 1940. But
now, Philippine Dreams is asking why I'm doing all the reading. Well, 1, I wrote it, and 2, it's a combination of our split abilities of John being able to throw stuff in and me being able to read stuff.
Yeah,
and so
I'm actually producing the video.
Look, we have strengths and weaknesses. Like Roaring HG, we... for those who don't know, look them up. We have different ways of doing things, and therefore we work together to achieve that.
But mostly I'm here to provide colour and reaction in this segment of the video.
He provides insights that I haven't written down. That's the main thing.
The Battle of Corregidor. Let's keep moving.
Okay,
here you go, Americans.
All right. Whenever I hear the Corregidor, I always think of the Fred Smith song Century Girl and the line, I landed with MacArthur at Corregidor.
Right. We should get Fred on the show.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, Fred Smith
is the nom de plume.
Yes, but if you haven't had the joy, he through a weird set of circumstances as a singer-songwriter has been involved in the Australian Army's wars on terror, and even before that, the wars in
is a diplomat
in the South Pacific. And he was my neighbour for a while, but I've been out drinking with him. I know him well. We can get him on the show.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. That'd be awesome, actually. His first-hand accounts of bloody Afghanistan and stuff would be really pretty. Anyway, and various other places, Vanuatu and all the other places. Anyway, the Fortress Island was under siege from 29th...
This is Corregidor. We're back to Corregidor.
Was under siege from 29th of December 1941 to on 3rd of February 1942, the submarine USS Trout dropped off 3,500 rounds of 3-inch anti-aircraft ammunition and loaded up 20 tons of gold and silver. I just wanted to throw that in there just to show that it was a thing. All right, so all these stories
moving the gold and silver around was what the whole war was predicated on. All the wars were predicated on.
I was about to say, so all these stories about Filipino gold and silver stashes and who are the Japanese generals silver hoards, gold hoards that Marcos found and somebody found, and all that sort of stuff. It was happening. All right, on 12th of March, under the cover of darkness, General MacArthur fled Corregidor on a PT boat bound for Mindanao. And then finally, on the 6th of May, 1942, 5 Type 97 tanks from the 7th Tank Regiment were loaded onto landing craft as part of the 50,000 Japanese troops intent on taking the Gibraltar of the East.
This is Corregidor.
Corregidor, that's what it's called, Gibraltar of the East. The island guarding the entrance to Manila Bay with its 14-inch guns.
The concrete battleship, some call. It's quite small, 50,000 troops. I don't know how that'll fit on it.
On the island?
On Corregidor.
Oh, well, that's not even including the Yanks, who had 15,000 over there.
It's astonishing. All right, okay.
All right. Arriving in the morning after a night of heavy infantry fighting, infantry battles, the tanks were the final straw and overran the American positions and forced the US commander to surrender the last American position in the Philippines. And then, so that's the first act. Second act where everything goes wrong. Now we get
for the Japanese, everything went right.
Yeah, and now for the Allies, now we're getting to the third act where everything's starting to soar up again, and we get to the Battle of Guam.
Now the thing to remember is that between the fall of Corregidor and the Battle of Guam, the battles of Coral Sea and Midway were fought, and the Japanese Navy was put back in its box.
Okay. Alan's calling us, one of us trained officer and the other's the hippie artist. Yeah. So you must be the hippie artist.
I can live with that.
I'm more of a hippie these days than I am. I rail against it, but I actually tick a lot of those boxes these days, which is really weird.
All right, Rob, I'm going to leave you a little bit of beer in the tube there.
We've got plenty more beer.
I know, we've got more beer.
Battle of Guam, July 1944.
This is me now.
Oh.
Yeah, it's me getting to talk.
He wrote these bits.
Yeah. So, July 1944, by 1944, the very light Chiha was seriously outmatched by American armour in the form of the M4 Sherman, sporting much thicker armour and a much bigger gun. Now, let's remember that when the Chiha was designed in the 1930s, the Americans had nothing close to it. Maybe you could...
The M2 medium.
The M2 medium.
No.
Maybe the
M2 light with its 7 machine guns.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. The Stuarts. No, this was the Chiha was probably a better tank than the Stuarts in straight tank v tank, and they're in the same weight class. So, but by 1944, when you're putting Shermans on the beach, this is much, much, much better. And the other funny thing the Japanese started doing was using stones to build little full-size replicas of their tanks out of stone, which absorbed a colossal amount of American firepower.
See the silhouette.
Because the silhouette, I've got to shoot that. But you can soak up as much American ammunition as you like. The Americans have never lost a war for lack of ammunition. So making them...
The Japanese are running out of ammunition on all these islands.
Japanese lose wars from lack of ammunition. Americans don't. So at Guam, there were 10 early Chihas and a lonely Shihoto with a longer gun. They were ordered to participate in a general attack on the 25th of July, but they lost their way and missed the attack.
Oh, what a shame.
Can you imagine how disappointing that would be if you were the infantry having to make that attack and you were promised the tanks would finally do something and then they get lost and don't make it. On the 10th of August, the last 10 Japanese tanks attacked the American tanks and were wiped out. That seems to be pretty one-sided from what I can see. Rob, I think Luzon was yours?
Yep. Battle of Luzon, January 1945. The middle of January to early February, the largest ever tank battle between Japanese and American tanks took place. The Japanese 2nd Tank Division with 220 tanks. There would have been more, but they had to send their other tanks to Lady, most of which were then sunk on transport ships. So they didn't even make it. So in the end, the 2nd Tank Division had 175 Type 97 Shihotos and 25 Type 89 Egos and 20 Type 95 Hargos against 59 Shermans, 17 M5 Stuarts, and infantry with bazookas and dozens of M7 Priest self-propelled guns. For 3 weeks, the Japanese tanks ambushed and harassed the US forces at night on the plains of Luzon, causing massive casualties without committing to battle. Eventually, they were all hunted down and 200 were destroyed. But yes, they held up the Americans for quite a while and it was quite bloody. Then we get to Operation Ichigo, which means number 1. Started in April 1944, the largest ever operation by the Japanese army with 500,000 troops and 800 tanks.
So there you go, massed armour. There we go, it happened.
800 tanks. The tanks of the 3rd Armoured Division started as the spearhead of the operation assaulting south of the Yellow River to take the Wuhan-Beijing Railway. The Japanese wanted to secure...
So just quickly, because I know that I've travelled through here. The Yellow River runs east-west. The Wuhan-Beijing Railway runs north-south. So they're crossing the Yellow River to take that north-south railway.
Yep. So the Japanese wanted to secure a route from Malaya/Indonesia to Japan that wasn't subject to interdiction by US subs at sea, because the subs were sinking any ship that was going from that way.
Literally the same reason the Japanese built the Grand Canal. Sorry, the Chinese built the Grand Canal. Huge apologies. Let's say it again. The Chinese built the Grand Canal to stop pirates stealing their coastal trade.
Yeah, okay. So they wanted the route from Vietnam to Korea that they could move fuel, rubber, tin, rice, and coal along the railway and at the same time knock out the US air bases in China. They had to stick to the railway as their roads in southern China were so poor that they couldn't last long with any vehicles on them whatsoever.
And Wuhan, the Wuhan Railway only gets you to Wuhan, which is on the Yangtze River. It doesn't get you into deep southern China, but it gets you a lot of China. Yeah.
The fights were mainly against disorganized nationalist Chinese forces, and the Japanese only controlled the towns and railways. The 8-month operation was a success for Japan, but they lost a lot of equipment and a lot of troops. And with the US taking the Marianas Islands, they no longer needed Chinese air bases to be able to bomb Japan. The operation involved most of the Japanese troops in China, and with them advancing south, it left pockets of opportunity for Mao and his communists to grow forces to grow in strength in the north. It's said to have had as much of a political outcome on the post-war world as Operation Overlord and Bagration. So, what happened with Overlord, with the Western Allies going through Western Europe and securing that, and with the Russians with Bagration going through Eastern Europe and securing that. This is what the Operation Ichigo basically secured China for the communists. So
an unintended consequence.
It was an act that actually set up the world for what happened after the war.
Yeah.
All right.
Mainly because they were attacking the nationalists and drawing forces further south and creating opportunities.
They were leaving all the gaps in the countryside in the north where Mao was. Right.
Now, the Battle of Okinawa started on 1 April 1945. That's a hell of an April Fool's. It's been called the Typhoon of Steel, both in English and in Japanese. The bloodiest and fiercest fighting of the Pacific War, and the determinant to use nuclear weapons rather than try and invade the Japanese mainland. Basically, after Okinawa, the Americans said, have we got anything other than doing this invasion of mainland Japan? And the nerds said, oh, we've got something for you.
The numbers they looked at and said, look, if we invade Japan, it'll be 2 million wounded and 500,000 dead Americans to invade the actual islands. And they said, 500,000 dead and 2 million wounded is not a number we're willing to accept. So therefore, let's drop those bombs.
Well, let's see what those nerds have been working on. Yeah. So Okinawa was an incredibly ferocious fight, the British had 4 fleet carriers damaged, although theirs stood up to damage a lot better than the American ones. That's well outside the scope of this podcast. Now, Okinawa as a tank conflict, Rob, the Japanese lost 27 tanks and the Americans lost 300.
That's probably all they had.
The Americans lost 375. But when you've only got 27 tanks and the other guys have hundreds more, that's not the win you might have hoped for.
And the other guys are saying, you know what, we're going to commit suicide anyway, so we may as well take out these tanks with us.
Yeah.
There was a lot of suicides in Okinawa.
Yeah, a lot of satchel bombs carried all the way to the target. The main value of the Japanese tanks was simply that they existed as a potential threat rather than anything they actually posed in their doomed interventions. As long as the Americans had to worry that Japanese tanks could turn up, they had to be more careful.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, and the beer tube
is done,
boys and girls. So we'll be moving on to other beers. Don't worry. As a logistician, I make sure we have plenty of beers. All right.
Do you want to hand me a can while you're thinking about it?
All right. Oh,
we wouldn't want to run dry. It's important to provision properly. Oh, another one of these.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about this.
Yeah, we'll be talking about those. All right. The Battle of Shumshu. The Soviets wanted the Kuril Island chain north of Japan. And Stalin even had designs on Hokkaido, And sorry, they even had designs on Hokkaido, which means what I really mean is Stalin wanted them. So after declaring war on Japan on 8th of August 1945, the Soviet forces landed troops on Shumshu Island in the Kuril chain. Then on the 17th of August, they landed their troops there on the 17th of August, 1945. The Japanese could not identify the landing troops, but eventually figured out they were Soviets. At 6:50 a.m. on the 18th of August, the 77 tanks of the 11th Armoured Regiment of the Japanese Armoured Regiment with Type 97 mediums and Type 95 lights, and the Naval Guard's forces of amphibious Type 95s, which are called the Type 2 Karmis.
I don't recall them from our episode on the Type 95, but yeah, there we go. All right.
Started the banzai charge against the charge against the Soviet forces on Mount Shirane, led by their regimental commander.
Shirani, but
Shirani,
yeah.
You're probably right, because I don't speak foreign. Anyway, they crashed into the Soviet forces, who responded with concentrated anti-tank weapons, 4 anti-tank guns, about 100 anti-tank rifles, and anti-tank phosphorus grenades, destroying Japanese tanks one by one, but were forced to retreat. The 11th Armoured Regiment lost 27 tanks and their commanding officer. Now, talk about arriving late at the battle. Lieutenant Nakazawa arrived late at the battle and was the only surviving tank commander. He advanced alone onto the mountain and did not return. By the end of the battle, Lieutenant Ito Chikuku was the only remaining commander of a surviving tank unit. The Soviets landed reinforcements and were able to gain the upper hand as the Japanese learned of their surrender to the Allies. The following days were spent trying to secure a ceasefire, but poor communications, bad weather, language barriers, and trigger-happy troops, ships, planes, and artillery meant that most of those going around with white flags were killed, until finally a surrender was agreed on the 23rd of August 1945. So, yes, trying to say, we give up. Well, you're going to get shot anyway. Anyway, on that 23rd of August, Nikolai Slavin, head of the Soviet General Staff in Moscow, asked the US military command in Manila via the US military liaison in Moscow, was it the American army that landed on Shumshu Island? The American reply was that no, it was the Soviets, showing that Stalin kept the mission secret from his own generals and based the operation all on a agreement signed in Yalta and then kept secret from there. So, yeah. All right. But then again, we get to the most famous Type 97. It was actually a Chinese tank operated by the communists. The Gongchen tank refers to a specific heroic tank, number 102. All right, with the Soviets in charge of Japanese disarmament on the mainland, they made sure to hand over any equipment to the Chinese communists, which is how the CCP received most of their Japanese tanks, but not the Gongchen tank. It was captured by the communists in Shenyang in 1945, along with some Japanese technicians who were then forced to repair the tank and another Shinhoto, number 101, as the Kuomintang, or KMT, were advancing on Shenyang, the Japanese sabotage tank number 101. So the Northeast Special Tank Brigade of one tank, being 102, and 30 soldiers was formed and broke through the KMT blockade. In its next action, tank number 102, along with 3 other tanks from the, how do you want to say that? Tonghua Artillery School, killed 3,000 KMT soldiers.
Holy crow! 3,000?
Citation needed.
Yeah.
Citation needed because there might be a little bit of propaganda going on here, boys and girls.
I strongly suspect 2,500 of those ran away and didn't appear for muster the next day and counted as casualties. But
the point being is that this tank had a lot of propaganda going about it. So
3,000.
Yeah, it gets better. It gets better. All right, that was
3 battalions.
That was at Suyang County. All right, at the Battle of Jinzhou in 1948. Number 102, tank number 102 was now known as Old Man Tank, and was knocked out and then repaired under fire before leading the charge into 100,000 KMT soldiers, who were then defeated.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So after the battle,
100,000.
There were 100,000 defenders in the city. And
have you ever been in a 100,000 strong crowd? Because I'm not sure I have. But
anyway, After the battle, tank number 102 was renamed the Gongchen tank, meaning heroic tank, and went on to lead the Communist Victory Parade in Tiananmen Square on the 1st of October 1949. It stayed in service until 1959 and now sits on display in the Military Museum in Beijing. When I hear about it, it goes on to lead the parade. It really makes me feel about Thomas the Tank Engine. Of you've achieved this great thing, and now you get to lead the parade.
Compare that to poor old Warspite, running itself aground in off the coast of Cornwall. But it's either the Chinese communists treat their heritage better than we do.
As I said, there's a bit of propaganda behind this tank, but it's still did the job. So there you go. It's the most famous Type 97. Anyway.
And yet 67% of people in our poll have said it was rubbish always. What kind of losers are you?
It beat 100,000. Yeah, anyway. Other Type 97s in Chinese service, of which there were about 100, Chinese Communist service, of which there were about 100 had their hulls modified and side armour removed, and some reportedly had the Soviet 500 horsepower Kharkiv Model V2.
That would have been a lot of horsepower in a 15-ton tank. That's the same engine that's basically in a T90 in a 15-ton tank.
Yep. However, any remaining vehicles on display have all had their engines removed, so it can't be confirmed how many of that, whether it actually occurred and where it happened.
A Kharkiv V2 was a strategic resource that would have been repurposed, even if the tank it was being taken out of wasn't.
Right.
But, yeah.
They also reconfigured Type 97s into self-propelled guns by installing a Chinese Type 94 75mm mountain gun onto the chassis. The tank was listed as a light tank under the PLA because they were used following the Russian designation of tanks.
The sensible ones.
Right.
This should be viewed as a very successful light tank, not a bad medium tank. But yeah.
All right. The KMT had around combined 140 of both versions of the Type 97, captured from the Imperial Japanese Army at the end of the war. Variants. Like so many successful tanks with a decent chassis and an engine, it was a basis for a lot of variants and upgrades throughout the war. First off, we'll start off with, which we'll probably do an episode of itself, was the Type 1 Chi-He medium tank, of which 170 were built as a successor to the Chi-Ha in 1943. The speed and welded armour were better than the Chi-Ha, but it still only had the Type 1 47mm main gun. They were kept on the home islands and did not see combat. The Type 3 Chi-Nu medium tank based on the Chi-He with 144 to 166 built in order to deal with the M4 Shermans. So the Japanese did have data on the Shermans from the Germans to be able to figure out what they could use to get it, what they could use to be able to disable it. So they installed a 75mm gun on the Chi-Nu to be able to take on the Shermans. Again, they were kept on the home islands and did not see combat.
Part of why the Americans went to the whole let's just nuke the buggers and get this over with was they knew that there were tougher, better forces in the home islands, and Okinawa was bad and it was going to be worse.
Yeah. And a lot more mountains, a lot more bridges, a lot more logistics
required. A lot more crazy people with high explosives running into you. But yeah.
All right, then we get to the Type 3 Ka-Chi, which 12 to 19 of those built, which was the amphibious Type 1 Chi-He chassis with a 47mm main gun and two 7.7mm machine guns. The Type 4 Katsu, 49 were built but not deployed. It was an amphibious armoured cargo troop track carrier and could be carried underwater attached to a submarine. And for those who don't know, like me, the Japanese had submarine aircraft carriers.
The Japanese had wild submarines. They didn't use
submarine aircraft carriers. They would.
They were going to attack the Panama Canal with them.
Yep, they had plans on taking out the Panama Canal. They were going to sail their subs over there, unload their bombers, fly them off, and then bomb the Panama Canal. It was going to happen.
But the wild thing was that despite all this weird submarine innovation the Japanese did, they never said, "Oh, why don't we use the submarines to attack the American supply ships?" And they completely failed.
They just wanted to bomb bloody San Diego.
Yeah, but if they'd actually attacked, because the American fleet across the Pacific, was enormous. They were towing floating dry docks across the Pacific, and if they'd attacked that instead of trying to go for fleet units, they would have slowed the war down by 6 months.
All right, anyway, the question is, with these Japanese submarine aircraft carriers, where are they in World of Warships? These things could also carry two torpedoes.
Get on it, World of Warships. What are you doing? What are you thinking?
They might be in the PC version.
It sounds like a Halloween kind of special.
They're probably in the PC version. We only play the console version. Anyway, the Type 5 Toku, with one prototype built, was the amphibious tank using the turret of the Type 97 and the hull of the Type 5 Chi-Ri hull. Prototype experimental obstacle clearance vehicle designed to destroy obstacles such as barbed wire fence and impenetrable undergrowth by firing a torpedo-type cylinder charge forward that would then explode and clear a path.
Is that like a Bangalore torpedo?
We'll get onto the Bangalore torpedoes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
there's another one with a Bangalore. Anyway, then there's the experimental charge layer vehicle, which had a 12 meter telescopic arm with high explosives at the end, designed to drive up to walls and pillboxes.
So this is the bayonet. People were asking for the bayonet, and here it is.
and place the explosives against them and explode. These are increasingly sounding similar to Hobart's Funnies because all these ideas he had as well. He built these things. Right. Then there's experimental trench excavator vehicle, which had a trench digging plough at the rear of the tank. At least one example was sent to Wewak on the north coast of Papua New Guinea for field testing, and I bet the infantry loved this for digging holes because, as we all know, digging holes sucks.
Yeah. Anytime you can mechanise your hole digging, you'll get much happier soldiers.
Craftsman Cat was the most favoured craftsman around the place because he could go around and dig a hole in about 5 minutes.
Look, there's a folk story that may or may not be true, that in the lead up to El Alamein, a British British lieutenant was touring the lines, and he saw a young bloke who was in a trench digging a foxhole and who didn't salute him. And he said, "Oh, you don't salute, do you?" And the guy who was digging the foxhole said, "Well, I'm a captain and you're a lieutenant." So,
all right, then we get on to the Type 97 with dozer blades for use in airfield construction and detached for combat. I wonder if 40K still gives tanks armor bonuses for having dozer blades.
It should. Dozer blades are very effective.
Back nowadays they used to, but anyway, they detached them for combat in Japan. Anyway, only a limited number of dozer blades were produced, and de-armed versions were used post-war for reconstruction in Japan. Then we get the experimental Type 98 Chi-Ho medium tank. 4 prototypes were made in 1939. It had a similar chassis to the Type 97, but only 5 road wheels, and started with the newer 47mm gun. It was to be the lower cost Type 97. Didn't go anywhere. Then we get the Type 2 Ho-I medium gun tank. So when they talk about gun tanks, we'll get into that. 31 built in 1944 as a close fire support tanks or gun tanks. So these are basically your assault tanks, is what we would normally call them. Fitted with a short-barreled 75mm gun for firing large HE rounds. They were kept on the home islands and did not see combat. Short-barreled 120mm gun tank. 12 built in 1944, fitted with an anti-submarine gun.
An anti-submarine gun?
Yeah, I know. Isn't that good? But anyway, so it was a naval gun, and basically it was what you used to shoot at submarines when they came to the surface.
Right.
I don't know what. Maybe it's shorter range or something, and more direct fire, so less arc in the round.
I mean, no one wants to take lessons from Japanese anti-submarine warfare because it was completely ineffective and useless. But obviously they had some ideas and they put them on their tanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Type 1 Honi 1 maybe? 75mm self-propelled anti-tank and artillery gun. 26 were built from 1942. They had an open casemate with a 75mm gun used as self-propelled artillery and direct fire anti-tank rolls.
I've got to say, if you're going for a casemate, you want bigger than 75mm. But yeah, anyway.
All right, saw combat at the Battle of Luzon in January 1945. The Type 2 had there were three of these types of tanks. The Type 2 had a 105mm gun. 54 of those were built, and the Type 3 installed a more modern version of the of the 75mm gun and had a fully enclosed casemate of 31 to 41 of those were built. They were deployed in tank regiments as tank destroyers. They were kept on the home island. Sorry, this is the Type 3s. They were kept on the home islands and did not see combats, whereas the Type 1s did, as I said, on Luzon.
I mean, there were some Japanese heavy tanks wandering around that, again, were never
tanks. I hate the bloody Japanese heavy tanks because I've never hurt them.
Yeah, anyway, they were never taken off the home islands and were being kept for this incredible destruction that was threatened. But yeah.
Right, then we got the Type 4 Ho-Ro with the 15-centimetre self-propelled howitzer. 12 were built in 1944 as an SPG with a short-barreled 15-centimetre howitzer, rushed into service late in the war at the Battle of Luzon and then Okinawa, where it was horribly outnumbered by American artillery. The Imperial Japanese Navy built a single long-barrel 120mm self-propelled gun mounted with a 120mm naval gun, as you do. Experimental Type 5 Ho-Chi self-propelled gun with a 15-centimetre gun with an open casemate.
So that, for those who don't speak metric, that's a 150mm gun that's bigger than a IS-2. But yeah.
The C-RE, or SETRE, I don't know how you pronounce that one, armoured recovery vehicle. 3 were built from 1939 with a collapsible crane and a rear winch with only a machine gun in the turret.
It's interesting because the Chiha engineering vehicles feature... The Australians captured a lot of them late in the war because I went through the War Memorial Archive looking for these things. And most of the pictures they had were actually engineering vehicles because I guess they weren't destroyed in combat. But yeah.
The Type 97 Chi-Yu mine flail tank, prototype built with 2 revolving drums with chains on the front, just like the Hobart's Funnies. It kept its turret and gun. The Type 97 mine clearing tank GS, prototype built in 1943 with a rocket launcher fitted behind the gun turret that would then launch a Bangalore torpedo affixed to a rocket forward to detonate mines.
Now let's explain, Rob, what is a Bangalore torpedo?
It is a long tube filled with high explosive that you would use to then push forward in front of you, and then once it was pushed forward, you would then light...
They use like pressurized gas to push it though, right?
No, you just shove it.
Okay.
Yeah, well, sorry, in the infantry, if you were carrying the engineers, your combat engineers would carry it forward, shove it through the either wall or barbed wire or whatever else, shove it forward, and then light the fuse, and it would blow up and then blow a hole in whatever obstacle you're trying to clear. I have to look up where Bangalore comes from. I mean, Bangalore
sounds like where it comes from.
I was about to say, but I mean, did the Indians invent it? Was it the East India Company? Well, I don't know. These are the things we need to know.
We'll sort this out in the halftime break.
All right. All right. Then there's the Type 97 experimental flamethrower tank number 2. Had 2 large elongated fuel tanks and 2 flamethrowers on each side of the hull. So you traverse the tank to fire the flames out the front because it's not in the tank.
That's pretty usual for flamethrower tanks.
No, usually they have them in the machine gun hull position, which is what the turret, which is what the early version flamethrower tank number 1 replaced the hull machine gun with a flamethrower. But this one just mounted on the outside, which sounds like a very orky tank to me.
Sure, but it makes a bit of sense because, I mean, it's certainly a turret-mounted flamethrower meant you have to reticulate the fuel if the turret wants to traverse. I mean, it turns into a nightmare, whereas just strapping it on the outside and you can ditch it if it catches on fire seems a lot smarter to me. But,
all right, then we have the Ho-Ka, an armoured lumberjack vehicle. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. With a steel prow mounted on the front with the turret removed for creating paths through forests used in Manchuria and New Guinea for constructions of airfields, which would then be followed up by the lumber sweeping Basso Ki, designed to remove severed tree stumps and generated by the work of the Ho-Ka. Then you got the Shi-Ki command tank with a machine gun in the turret and a 37mm gun in the hull. Had a rail antenna for long-range comms and superior optics. The Ka-So was a later model command tank to replace the older Type 97 Shi-Ki based on the Chi-He with the additional radios and a wooden dummy gun in the turret. The Type TG bridge...
We're going to have to interrupt you. Half-Life APC has joined us. Hello.
Hello.
And he says, I think this is addressed at you. Don't you think wearing a T-shirt which can be perceived as endorsing Japanese militarism is a bit insensitive to the victims of their crimes against humanities? Apologies if the shirt isn't about the Type 97.
It's definitely about the Type 97. So my
brother we are not endorsing crimes against humanity.
I'm a hippie, supposedly. So
no, I'm the hippie.
No,
you're the militarist.
I tick all the boxes for being. Anyway, actually, I'm a champagne socialist. How's that? I've got a bottle of champagne in the fridge tonight upstairs, and we're going to drink that while watching rugby after the podcast.
Anyway, we say no to Japanese militarism,
No.
but
Unless it's good for us.
but we like
like World War I, it was good for us. World War II, no, bad.
but we like putting tanks on t-shirts. So I'm not.
I did consider taking photos of my T-shirt and figuring out what the actual all the words mean, but I have no idea because there's a lot more on the back.
Oh.
I got
Jesus. It's all in Japanese.
Yeah, I got.
Fuck at that.
I mean, I don't speak foreign.
I've got to admire Half-Life's eyes to spot your Type 97 though. That's,
Anyway, the Type TG bridge layout with the turret removed and rollers on top for the on top of the hull to deploy a folding bridge. And then we've got the last one, the experimental anti-aircraft tank Taha. One prototype was not finished by the end of the war and was based on the Chihi chassis with the turret replaced by a rotating twin-mounted anti-aircraft gun with the gun shield. Now we get to the legacy.
all right, hang on, Rob. The poll is currently running at 33% a great tank for its time and 67% rubbish always. And you're just wrong. You're just wrong, people.
Was it a good
Democracy, it's useless. Let's get some fascism in here.
Was it a good mid to late war tank? No. Was it as good as any early war tank? Yes. Did it enable Japan to achieve victory after victory against more numerous but poorly equipped and poorly organized US, British, Commonwealth, and Chinese troops, we're not going to mention the Russians, by being the only tank to turn up on the battlefield? Yes. Did it win or lose in the war? No. Right?
But I've written an article on the Type 95 Hargo on Quora that's had over 1 million views, and my point there is that the war was not going to be won for the Japanese in their tanks, and that is why they did not invest in it. It was going to be won or lost at sea, and fundamentally it was lost in their pilot training program and their inability to make good their losses.
And stop them bloody killing themselves, and so you can actually build up a decent core of veterans. Anyway, now we get to the important part. Girls on Panzer. Their movie. The Type 97s from the Chi Tan School starts the movie doing a bonsai charge against the Brits of the St. Gloriana School and getting blown up. So not Malaya then. They also then get plenty of screen time in the Girls on Panzer finale series for the Chi Tan School. So that's the important part. They also have a Type 97 Chi along with a Type 97 TK Tech Cut down at the Puckapunyal Tank Museum.
Like I say, when Rob says they also, he doesn't mean Girls and Panzer have them down at Puckapunyal.
No.
Puckapunyal is the Australian Army's armour museum and armour training facility.
So so when they open up again later on this year, after being closed for the last 2 years, we'll have to make a trip down there to see.
We really will.
To see the Type 97.
I feel like the chieftain needs to go to Pucka, but I mean everyone needs to go to Pucka. Everyone needs to go to Pucka.
I've been to Pucka. It's not the asshole of
the world, but you can see it from there. The Australian Army also says that about Singleton, which is the infantry training school. But anyway, we are reaching the end of this half. We still have more to go. This has gone an enormously long time. This is fantastic. We're going to set the record.
Don't worry, we have more beer.
We have more beer. So we're about to play you some videos from the Australian War Memorial, including the British mistyping of the this tank in their type identification video, which I just love so much. And then there's it's Japanese footage of
their
training school for the tank, which is really interesting. And we're going to see you on the other side of that. Folks, thanks so much for hanging around, and we will charge onwards. There is so much to talk about in the second half with things happening in the world of tanks in the last month. It's amazing. On that note, we'll see you in about 13 minutes. Cheers, folks.
This, the Japanese medium tank, or Chu Sensha M2595, was first made in the land of the cherry blossom in 1935, which to the Japs is the year 2595, so we'll call it the Jap 95 medium. Weight only 15 tons with a speed of 25 miles an hour. Manned by a crew of 4 yellow men, it's the heaviest Jap tank so far seen in action. It was the enemy's standard equipment in China and Malaya. Starting at the top, what do you see first? A circular cupola with its domed periscope on a thick lip. It's centered on an ordinary turret shape with almost level top and sloping sides. Watch that strange aerial as we swing round. It's also used as a handrail. The cupola is no longer centered and its periscope is staggered left. The whole turret sits on the right of a high superstructure extending over narrow tracks. Those evenly spaced medium bogey wheels look a bit German. Now for the upper works. The engine hides under a gridded casing that slopes up from the tail to a square, wide superstructure bearing the turret well forward, and seen end on, that turret is an odd shape. Cupola offset and rear LMG set at an angle to the long rear deck. That'll do for a quick run round. Now for the reason why. How's this for a turret? The main mass is ordinary enough with its sloping sides and flat top, but that fancy circular lip cupola is something different. It's placed offset right. The whole thing is topped off with a domed periscope set left. That wireless aerial cum handrail is pretty original too, very useful for strap-hanging infantry passengers. Take a look at Honourable Pagoda from this aspect. Sloping sides and flat top, with a slight dip towards the front. Armament faces both ways. That's a 57mm gun in front and an LMG at the back in a ball mounting. As soon as the Jap 95 medium comes into full view, we can see the turret is offset too, on the right of the flat-top superstructure. Notice how the sides slope out to cover the characteristically narrow Jap tracks. The height of an average man gives you a clue to her size. Don't forget she'll look bigger still with one of the Jap crew in the offing. Round a bit. That's it. Now we can study the hull in 3 separate parts. From the blunt nose, there's a short slope up to the bow-fronted driving cab, and next to it a ball-mounted MG. Then an angular flat-top superstructure, and finally a long rear deck sloping away to the tail. Before we leave the ground, we've got a good view of the suspension with its typical Jap spring casing. Come up here, chaps, and take a look at that turret position set on a square superstructure. There's the rear LMG, peering out over the long deck. The suspension looks very German with those 6 regular, medium-sized bogey wheels. But we know all about the Jap coil spring trademark already. Further round towards the rear, we get a good view of the engine housing, with air intakes on top. The sides slope towards flat track guards with the usual clutter. As she turns her back on us completely, we've a chance to commit to memory the following points: the heavy circular cupola and the irregular shape of the turret. Looks partly traversed, doesn't it? That's because the rear LMG is offset. The whole thing is offset to the right of that square, wide superstructure. From it comes a long rear deck, widening out from front to back. There are two exhausts perched at the end of the track guards. Got it? Well, that's the works on the Jap medium tank. One more circular tour to give you a chance to take in the general outline. Your knowledge of what detail lies behind it enables you to know it at a glance. And now that you've got it all pat, we'll sum it up for you in 4 different views. And that brings us to the end of the 95 medium. Pride of the Japanese Empire.
戦車をもって敵陣を突破蹂躙しつつ照準を定め素早く射撃をするためには容易ならぬ熟練を要する。戦車内部からの通信や射撃につきまとう困難を一歩一歩征服しつつ少年たちの夢は刻々と実現されてゆくのだ。3秒。
And we're back. So, in answer to Philippine Dreams, waiting for Godzilla to show up. Godzilla, just remember, boys and girls, fought Chaffies, not Chihars. Right.
Which is a shame.
Well, yeah. Anyway, that's where we go. There is another. So that was a great little couple of great little films from the Australian War Memorial. There's another one from 28th of September 1945, showing the handover parade when Major John Mackay, the commander of Squadron B Squadron, 2nd 4th Australian Armoured Regiment, officially took command of 80 Japanese tanks at Kokopo on the island of New Britain, Papua New Guinea, previously known as German New Guinea, which was also the scene of the first Australian land action in World War I in September of 1941, when 1914, when 500 Australians took on, scraped together Australians took on 300 German, basically police on the island as the beginning of the war.
So, Rob, what's it time for?
It is time to thank our patrons, who are the most awesomest people in the world.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, a group chat that even Peg Heseth couldn't mess up. So let's quickly run through who we've got. The Artificer tier, who they get the interview early and the ad-free video and the audio of the show. We've got Brian Jenkins, Chicago John, Chris Pezze, Cornelius Weber, Johnny Oot, Late Apex, Maxi Mist, Monty Mace, and Pear. And then in the Apprentice tier, who also get the ad-free audio and video of the show, we have Anton Gorbanov, Carter Heller, Christoph Keller, Dan Sapienza, David Mulvaney, Elliot Spicer, Floaty Burb, Gihuk, Hans Wang, Henry Hemerd, Jay Beckman Strauss, Jamie Stokes, Red Rum X1216, Russell Phillips, Scotch 12, Steve Matthews, and Tony L. Now,
I'm glad that Red Rum's not 8647, because that'll get you in trouble.
Yes, yeah, very, very, very good point. That'll get you arrested. Just even suggesting that someone might think ill of great leader is a thought crime. Now, there's been ongoing issues with patrons and Apple Bastardry, and we've been saying for months now, use the web browser to join if you're so inclined, because that way Apple doesn't tax it. But come on to totallytank.net and find the link from there. We have noticed there's been a decline in new patrons since this issue blew up, so don't let that be the reason you don't subscribe. If you don't want to subscribe, that's cool too. But we're just saying
we'll be here. We love you anyway.
We're still going to get the money, and also this fear, uncertainty, and doubt has been what Apple wants to force us to use their podcast subscription service, which we don't particularly want.
You're not my coal mine supervisor.
Yeah, we don't want another one. Okay, so Rob, it's time for the beer review.
I guess we are reviewing the premium Japanese dry Modus. Now, with all the Japanese characters on this beer, you would think it was made in Japan, but no, it was advertised as a Japanese style beer. It's zero carb. First, no shortcuts. Established 2014 Australian craft.
There's a thing going on at the moment where, because there's so many cheap flights to Japan from Australia, that Australians are visiting Japan in numbers they never have before, which is great. Japan is a place well worth visiting. But it's led to the phenomena of the bento bogan, which is basically people who would otherwise be making a nuisance of themselves in Bali are now making nuisances of themselves in Japan. And as long-time viewers of the show might know, this podcast does have a Tokyo bureau chief, which is my brother, who's been living there for 30 years now. So to get back on track, what we have is a lot of Australian brewers are trying to produce a Japanese-style lager, because so many Australians have gone over to Japan and had Japanese beer and said, "Oh, this stuff's actually really good."
Not to mention, all the Japanese breweries have bought the Australian beers.
All 85% of beer drunk in Australia is owned by a Japanese brewing conglomerate. Yeah,
It's like our gas as well.
Yeah,
that we produce for the rest of the world, and we are the second highest producer these days. It's owned by Japanese or American companies.
Australian-produced natural gas has to go for a holiday in Japan before it gets reshipped to Australia because we're stupid. It's really stupid. Anyway, this is a Australian brewery's attempt to make a Japanese lager, and there's a lot of these around at the moment. And look, it just tastes like a bad knockoff of Sapporo.
Yeah, Sapporo and Asahi. I mean, Sapporo is my go-to. Asahi is my well, if I don't have Sapporo, I'll go Asahi because they are my favorite beers.
I mean, particularly the Japanese Okinawan beers are fantastic for summer. They're really made for that. Like Ebisu comes straight to mind. But I mean, if I just drank this is a beer, I'd say, oh, this is a nice lager. But it's trying to it's trying to be a Japanese lager, and it's not getting to that level.
I do remember.
And having said that, I just want to say, Modus Operandi, who make this beer, this is not their best work. They make a lot of really great beers. This is okay. It's not bad, but yeah.
No, but it's just the way it's zero carb, and the way they're trying to basically hide the fact that they're trying to say this is Japanese beer, but of course it's not.
Just quickly, Half-Life ABC is asking, how did that natural gas deal get finagled? And it comes down to
because all their politicians go work for the gas companies after they get out of politics.
But the shorter-ish answer is that it's because we were willing to lock in long-term gas deals, and to fulfill those long-term gas deals, the gas has to go to Japan, and then we can buy it out of their market. It's a bad outcome, but
it's really bad, and we don't get any money from it.
Mm-hmm. All right, are we ready to move on?
I think so, and
we have another beer to come later. 2 beer reviews.
Ozama Fest 2025. Start your booking tickets now. You too could be hanging out with us, and possibly Sabaton.
Look, we
can start this rumor now. Sabaton will be there. No,
we're joking. Sabaton's Australian tour is starting a few days after Ozama Fest, and
in Perth, unfortunately, which is a long way away. But if they're flying from America, maybe they'll come via. And
anyway, we're just joking. We can't promise Sabaton.
But we'll start the rumor.
We cannot
might be there. I love the idea of start a rumor on Friday morning. I was saying, I hear there's going to be an early knockoff today. You got to start the rumor.
Yeah,
you got to start the rumor to make it happen.
But the bigger point is that we don't care who else is there. Us, we are just going to go ride tanks and drink beer. If more of you folks want to come, we will ride tanks and drink beer with you. And we will organise the pub nights every night. And we will organise.
And there will be money over the bar one of those pub nights.
Yeah, Philippine Dreams has got onto the Ozama Fest because the auto captions have got us saying Oz Armour as Ozama. And it's awesome. I'm going to do a T-shirt on that. But anyway, so it's 29 to 31 August this year, 2025. If you have got some travel availability later in your year, it's going to be great fun for anyone who loves tanks. We're going to have a great time. So strongly recommend you get in on that.
We'll be drinking beer. We'll be talking tanks. We'll be riding tanks. We'll be talking tanks and riding tanks and drinking beer.
Yeah.
Who knows what else is going to be happening. It's going to be exciting and fun, and we're going to have a blast. Doesn't matter.
Now, we had a great piece of feedback from the Bradley episode.
Yes.
So this is from Tiger Shark 7155, and so I'm quoting from him now. I was one of the last drivers to swim a Bradley. It was an army-wide event. All Bradleys were to test their swim shields. Bradleys in the US were put into the water, then the Bradleys in Germany were put into the water. Several Bradleys were lost in the US along with a few drivers. By the time we finished up in Germany, all Bradleys were suspended from water operations. A few weeks later, mechanics came by and helped us pull out all swim screens and equipment. As I understand, the screens were faulty and collapsed. I'm not surprised if the Army tried to blame the crews. We could only swim in flat, calm water, and I don't remember if this was before or after the FMG guys had to come by to add the extra bottom armor. My M3 Bradley was 00000042, and my scout platoon was used for the model kit for the M3, even down to our platoon insignia. I was in 3rd Infantry Division 363, armour from 1986 to 88. So thank you so much for sending that through. That was absolutely fascinating. In terms, and that's the kind of feedback and input we love from the actual armour community talking to us. So,
now, Philippine Dreams, now, we don't get to drive the tanks, which would be really fun one day maybe, but we do get to ride the tanks.
Yeah. So the point of certainly the Australian Armour
Don't worry,
Festival,
we'll be drinking beers and then riding tanks.
Yeah.
We'll be doing that as well.
Yeah, but we don't drive the tanks.
No,
although
we're very responsible on our driving, drinking and driving.
A certain Nicholas Moran, when we went in 2022,
Yep.
Did crash a T-72 into an 88. So that's the sort of fun you get to see.
Now, he did an episode about tanks ramming anti-tank guns with military history not visualised. And I put the comment up about, yes, he's got experience of doing this. I don't think it hasn't gotten any love, and I'm a bit sad about that.
You need to log into the Totally Tanked account and ask the question. He does respond.
I know, he's very
yeah.
Anyway, M10 debacle.
When you think about waste in military procurement, this might be the most wasteful.
Come on.
I mean, there's been a lot. Certainly,
Come on.
Aircraft.
Bradley.
Well, Bradley got there in terms of something useful. So the M10 has been cancelled. It's not going to be built. We've been told it's a happening thing.
The M10 Booker. So this is the light American the mobile gun platforms.
They're not a tank.
They're not a tank. The armoured gun platform? No, I can't remember. It's just MGF? No. M10 Booker. Thanks to tip from Mike via Totally Tanked. It's too heavy to... I'll let you do these.
Sure. So the totallytank.net website. Mike sent us in the tip, and it's been great to get that. Thank you very much, Mike. Basically, the problem with the M10, the many problems actually, it's too heavy to do the things it needs to do. It can't use the bridges at the infantry bases it's meant to go to. I think Fort Campbell
Kansas
is the one that's causing a lot of the problems.
82nd Airborne.
The Air Force has changed its rules on what it can lug, so it's saying we can only take one per C-17.
Of which they're not building anymore, just remember that, boys and girls.
Yeah, that's an absolute disaster to not build. They're the most useful aircraft the US has produced in 50 years, and they've turned off the production line. So it can only fit one, and it can also fit one Abrams. So do you want a light tank or a heavy tank if only one can fit in the plane? It can't go in C-130s, the Hercules, it was supposed to. It's not parachutable. It was supposed to be. That was the whole point from the start.
At least deployable, if not.
Yeah. General Dynamics right to repair clause is causing a lot of issues, meaning the maintenance and repairs can't be done in the field and has to go back to the contractors, which is not great for a forward deployable air mobile vehicle. But you've also got the huge issues that it has no active protection system. It has no counter-drone capability. It's supposedly a new tank, and it's just not fit for the 21st century battlefield. Philippine Dreams is saying we got banned from TikTok for excessive inebriation. We appealed that, and we won the appeal.
Yeah, we won.
Don't you go talking smack about us like that.
We won.
Yeah.
Because we're winners. Right. Yes. Look, it looked like such a good little tank. I really wanted it to be successful, but it kind of failed.
I've had some very vociferous feedback as well. We said it had the L7 gun in it.
No, it was the M68 gun, wasn't it?
Well, it's a new gun. It is L7 ammunition compatible.
Yes.
But it is a much lighter weight gun and is not an L7.
Yeah.
So we take that feedback on board. Now, as part of the cancelling of the Booker, the US Army, well, the drunken idiot, I think that's a fair comment about Peter Hegseth. He wants to sue us. He's literally thrown an axe at a human being.
I'm not coming to the US anytime soon. No, I can say whatever I like.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I'm not planning to go there anytime in the next 3 years.
No, we sadly, American folks, we don't think we can visit you again under the current regulations.
Oh yeah. Anyway, big changes coming for the U.S. Army and remember, folks. Sorry, this one's yours. No, I've got some stuff.
That's okay. Any time spent restructuring and studying future systems is time your Treasury doesn't have to pay for new programs. This happens in Australia. This is what explains our submarine madness. You can just defer actually spending anything, but if you have to go to war while you're messing around, then you're in trouble.
You don't have the things you want. All right. Yeah. So with the US Army getting rid of 4-star positions, they need to make sure that they continue the training and experience of the other staff officers. As the one thing you really need when something kicks off is experienced staff officers to make the plans. Because you know what? ChatGPT is not going to plan the defense of Taiwan for you. So just putting that out there, that getting rid of all those positions, make sure you got somebody who can knows what's what and how to do things, because AI is not going to solve that solution.
Change is sometimes necessary, but it's always painful. Yeah.
All right. Also, Pete Hegseth is also changing the funding models to agile funding with pots of money and chasing out lobbyists. Where there'll be great opportunities for corruption for the military, with only specific companies being invited to fulfill a contract rather than an open tender process. And just remember that the Supreme Court has ruled that tips for excellent service to the contract provider by the future contract winner before a decision is made do not count as a bribe unless they actually write the word bribe on the check.
It's problematic.
And it's going to get better soon. All right.
I just want to quickly circle back on the M10. The other issue that seems apparent is that the M1E3 is under design, and they're looking to get the weight down to at least 50 tons, and frankly, they probably need to get it to 40, which is where the Booker is anyway. And at that point, it's supposed to have a proper APS, and it's supposed to have...
You're never going to get it to 40. It'll be at least 60.
There are a lot of good reasons why it should be 40. But mainly, look at every road transport network in the world, it's rated to 40 tons. Because that's a full-size truck, right? So anything bigger than that can't use the main transport network of any country in the world. Those big, super heavy, they're not described. What's currently called an MBT is too heavy to use the bridges.
Well, the Western MBT, the Russians.
The Russians have always kept it in that 40 ton range, and there's a reason. And they've accepted huge design compromises, but the mobility is why they've accepted it. So if you're going to get the M1E3 certainly down to where they're talking about 50, and it'll probably be delivered at 60, it's still, though, why would you accept a 40-ton tank that doesn't have an active protection system when you can just get more of the 60-ton tanks? And with the move to lighten up the American MBT, the lighter Booker just stopped making any sort of sense. I don't think Pete Hegseth is great, but I think he has made an okay call here.
It's not fit for purpose, but wouldn't it be nice to have a nice little tank to be able to run around and do things for the...
The other thing is it's built on the Ascod platform, which is an Austrian-Spanish co-design from the 1980s. The British Ajax, which at this point is still in the failed category, although they're still hoping to make it come good, is based on the same freaking chassis. That is a 20-ton chassis that gets overloaded to 40 tons and then ceases to work. So there's a lot to go. And, Brett Parker's saying, does it cope with drones? No, it's got no drone capability whatsoever. And
because it was built and it was designed from 2013, whereby there were no drones, but blowing things up at that stage.
But there was also designed in 2013 with a backwards compatibility view to 2000. And fundamentally, it's 2025, and you've got to do some clean sheet thinking, and you've got to get it into market within a couple of years of that. The time for 20-year development processes is behind us.
Jasmine, if you think they're telling everybody they've fixed the Ajax problem, but we'll believe.
I'm still waiting to see an Ajax deployed usefully.
Exactly.
Let's.
All right. The Aussie Abrams.
Yes.
Guess what? They're still stuck at home. The 49 Abrams that we were trying to send to Ukraine, they're still stuck in Australia. I said last time that we thought they might have been stuck in Poland. No, they're still stuck in Australia. And who knows when they might leave Australia.
Worth noting, so this is about, what, 50?
49.
49, yeah, okay. About 50 is pretty close.
Yeah.
These are Australian Abrams tanks that we have done a swap with the US to get newer Abrams tanks into Australia. And then the US has agreed to... Yeah, the US has agreed that they can be sent to Ukraine because
they agreed to it last year prior to Trump coming in, and then everything fell off the rails.
And these tanks are still meant to be into Ukraine. And 50 Abrams or 49 Abrams is an enormous game changer on the Ukrainian battlefield, but they're still sitting in Australia while people don't support Ukraine. On that note, Ukraine is reducing its tank force, Rob, because
it's they're too hard to keep in the field, and the Western ones are too heavy, and they
Well, it's just in the drone-heavy environment of the Ukraine battlefield, which is not necessarily replicable elsewhere, but is certainly a fair indicator of where the world's heading. Tanks have to be used carefully, but it's a bit like battleships had to be carefully in 1916 because a destroyer could in theory launch torpedoes that would destroy your enormous battleship.
So could a submarine.
Whereas it's
more submarines than I think destroyers for your drones.
But the issue is that a tank that has no counter drone capability is not a very good tank in 2025.
Unless you build a cage around it.
Well, there's the cages, but my point is just if you can't eliminate the drone threat, then the drone threat will eliminate you. So that's just something we all have to move forward with. But anyway, Ukraine is apparently reducing its tank force because it basically needs IFVs and lots of anti-drone stuff.
Brett Parker reckons we should be going mobile infantry. So Johnny Rico and the Roughnecks launching from orbit.
Look, when you can build that power suit, that's great. But if you're putting something tank-sized on the battlefield, it has to be eliminate aviation threats.
Yeah.
But
everybody fights.
As we've said, tanks have always followed naval developments, and part of that is naval warships today are mostly anti-aircraft, partly anti-submarine assets. And I don't think anti-submarine is going to be a problem for tanks, but the anti-air, they have to be able to solve that or they're useless.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, you get this next one.
So Bill Gates,
gave Elon a good kicking.
Yeah, so this is just following on from things we've talked about in other episodes. Bill Gates did an interview and he said, the picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one. And this is exactly what we said, I think, about four months ago. So I just wanted to throw that in the show. And
let's give a shout out to the 98-year-old World War II veteran who ran over Tesla and Air Force Sherman.
If you go to totallytank.net, we've got the video up on the site.
I mean, he wasn't driving, yes, but neither were we. So,
but he said, "Come on, let's go crush these fascists."
we did it back then. We'll do it again, and away he went. Yeah, he was moving good for 98. Christ, I'm hoping that would be nice.
I like if someone can get me in a tank turret when I'm 98, so we can go crush a fascist car. That'd be great.
That would be awesome.
So also, and again, this is something that we've said, but it's nice to see someone of Bill Gates' stature saying it. Elon Musk put USAID in the wood chipper because he didn't get to go to a party that weekend.
His ketamine must have been overdosed or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, Houthis triumph over the US Navy. Tell us about that, John.
Well, look, it's not tank related, but it's the Houthis are tank related because they destroy a lot of Western armor when it tries to invade their territory. And Donald Trump tried to declare war on the Houthis a few months ago and lost so many drones and 3 F-18s that just fell over the sides of the carriers. And then there was a bunch of F-35s that nearly got shot down. So Trump has...
this before or after that Pete Hegseth's buddy published the operational details before the raid?
After.
All right. Yeah. So
it wasn't. That wasn't Pete's fault.
But it should. How do you know?
Anyway,
were you on that signal chat?
Yeah.
No.
So the point is that Mr. Trump, President Trump. Let's give him his
47.
Full,
47.
Yeah. He has totally abandoned the Israelis
As
and said that he's leaving the Houthis to run their bit of Yemen.
As long as they don't bomb
An American ship.
American ships. The Brits haven't agreed to it, and he hasn't said anything about them bombing Israeli ships either.
Yeah.
So
they're going to bomb Israeli ships. They're definitely going to do that. Now, Tasman, I hope you're still on the line. Send us the link that the Koreans have started work on the K3, and in fact, they've got a long way along with that. It's got a 130 millimeter gun. It's got a 30 millimeter autocannon for the short range air defense mission, which the Germans are definitely going in the same direction there. And the crew are going to be in a capsule outside of the turret, so down in the hull. I mean, the K2 I still think is the most advanced tank in the world right now, and it's interesting where
they're setting themselves up as the other option besides getting a Leopard 2 is or a Leopard 3 or a Panther, K-51 Panther is a case of, right, you can either go the Germans or you can go the Korean tanks. Philippines, yes, look, a lot of people have been beaten by the Houthis. Let's just put it that way. They
Saudis, UAE, other groups in Yemen.
Yeah, it's a case of, well, they're committed to their cause. And
also, it's also, what are you going to do to the Houthis, right?
You're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age? That's where they are.
They're in the Stone Age.
They just happen to have AK-47s and what's the SA-11 SAMs, whatever, to shoot down.
And the Iranians do send them some stuff, but lots of old Soviet gear, and they're willing to use it. And I personally have some admiration for the only force in the world that is willing to support the people of Gaza militarily while they're being brutalized by the Israelis.
Yep.
And I do not apologize for that opinion. Anywho.
As the Israelis shoot down, blow up another 2 hospitals this week in order to think that they might get a Hamas leader. They blow up hospitals full of people who...
No, they're trying to force a genocide because ethnic cleansing is genocide. Let's not kid ourselves.
And which is why Trump has just let in all the South Africans to America, because they're going to have to flee South Africa because it's a genocide.
There were only 57 of those. But I mean, as a gesture, that was off colour. But anyway... Moving on, Rob, you want to talk about the...
Okay, so the Ukrainians have drone boats, and now they're shooting down Russian jets over the Black Sea with Sidewinder missiles. So the Czechs, and I think it is, and have been giving them Sidewinder missiles, and they've been loading them up onto their drone boats that they're driving around in the Black Sea. And when they see a Su-35 flying at low altitudes, they say, you know what, I've got a range of 9 kilometres. Bang, away these things go, and they've shot down at least 2. And it's a case of, I think they're fighter bombers, the Su-35s. In this case of, that's pretty crazy stuff, and these things can go scream around at about 60 knots. And
look, I've been saying for years that electronic warfare is more important than a lot of people realise, and I had a very frank exchange of views with the chieftain in a Cairns pub a few years ago about this. But fundamentally, radio intercept officers are required in fighter jets. So if you need one of them in a fighter jet, you need one of them in a tank in the modern era. And we're getting to a point with EW. The Russians are deploying a lot of EW in the Ukraine war. Theirs tends to be continuously emitting, and because it's continuously emitting, it's continuously targeted. And this is why you can't just have a jammer and hit the on button. You actually need operators to decide when is the appropriate time to use it. Because anytime you are emitting electronic warfare countermeasures, you become a giant radiating target. So it's a very complicated sphere that is very poorly understood and extremely classified. And I just happen to know a little bit about it, but I would not claim to be an expert because, like I said, everyone who actually knows about it doesn't get to talk about it, and it doesn't appear in the public as much as it should.
I just like the idea that the Ukrainians are taking air-to-air missiles that have a certain range. They're putting them on boats, and then...
They've got to have a booster to get it up there because... because air-to-air missiles are designed to be fired from 60,000 feet at Mark II, and then they use that speed and height.
They're just shortening the range on them probably, and they're saying they're fitting these air-to-air missiles on boats and then firing them from the sea to where these planes are flying overhead at certain ranges out to about 9 kilometres, I think they said, and shooting them down. It's going, wow, it's a case of it's innovative and low cost, as long as they can actually keep getting the Sidewinder missiles.
But you say low cost, but they had to put that missile on a drone and send it bobbing out across the ocean and hoping it would. It's not necessarily the best use, but they achieved the results, so I can't question it too hard. But yeah.
All right. I am now going to go on to our next beer review beer, which is the Sapporo Premium Black Beer. All right.
Rip that next to your microphone.
Okay. The big cans, the 650s.
Sapporo make the most beautiful beer cans in the world. There is, without question,
silver
because they
bullet,
look
but
like a beautiful glass.
This is the black silver bullet, as it were. Now, when I was skiing in Japan last, which was quite a long time ago, I started out going to a lovely place on the hillsides of Hirafu, Niseko, and I'd have my pork katsu curry and 2 beers. And I started out with a 350ml beer, and then it went to a
350.
Then it went to a 375ml beer, and then it went to a 450ml beer, and then it went to a 500ml beer, and then it went to a 660 or 650 imperial Japanese imperial pint beer. And as I was going through the days and having one of those or 2 of those for lunch, I always said I only had 2 beers, and they were delicious. And with my katsu curry, and I'd have a great afternoon skiing from there. Anyway, yes, it's a very dark Sapporo Premium Black.
It's a black lager, though. I mean, it's
only 5% though, so it's in this big can of 650ml can. It's 2.6 drinks, and I'm looking forward to it and seeing how we go. Because even though it's not quite winter here in Canberra, being the 17th of May, it is still. Yet you posted the photo this morning when it was cold, but I tell you what, it was after about 11 o'clock this morning. It was beautiful. It was beautiful and sunny and not cold at all. And I don't really think it's been cold actually here in Canberra yet.
Oh, look, we had a cold, foggy morning, but climate change is insanely real and insanely damaging. And
yes,
yeah.
As I was having to explain to my child, yes, we're in the middle of I think it's what's the climate thing of La Nina, whereby the temperatures are very mild, which means it's great here in Canberra because we have very mild winters. Everywhere else is getting lots of flooding and everything else like that. And so
yeah, I mean, it's a classic Simpsons meme, son, this isn't the coldest. This isn't the warmest winter of your life. It's the warmest winter of your life so far.
Yeah. All right. This is really nice. This black.
It's very malty.
Yeah.
And malty in a good way. Look, we are no strangers to being fans of Japanese beer making, and I would happily say that the Japanese buying the major Australian breweries has improved the quality of domestic lager in Australia enormously. Good on you, Japan. Thank you so much.
And we like your skiing too. All right.
Although on a slightly unrelated note, getting back into totally sanct territory, the Japanese have got an article in the US Navy Institute journal Proceedings just this week saying Australia should buy the Megami class frigates from Japan. And the reason they gave was that if the war kicks off with China, all the Japanese bases will be destroyed immediately. So if we've got the same frigates, then the Japanese Navy can continue to functioning out of Australian bases.
That's not what you want to base your decisions upon.
No, I would like to think that Japan...
It is one reason, but it's not the reason you want to base your decisions upon. I mean, it's better than saying, oh, look, we have to keep the Americans invested in us, so we have to spend $368 billion over the next 30 years to get some subs.
Or our involvement in the Vietnam War. But yeah, anyway... that was quite a thing to read. But Rob, you want to talk about the Australian election?
Yes, I do. All right, and yes, in Australia here, we had an election here 2 weeks ago, and
we said, you know what, Trump's MAGA? No, we're going the other way.
Yeah.
Same as Canada did.
Yeah. Yes, the Conservatives got their hats handed to them. But one of the unintended consequences of that is they did so bad that they managed to bring down the Greens in the lower house because usually it would be a case of the Greens competing with the Conservatives. Then it became the Greens competing with the Labor people, and the Labor people won. And that was how bad the Conservatives did. They changed the dynamics and killed off the Greens.
Look, Rob, as a very former Greens election worker and strategist, it's not just the Liberals' fault. The Greens have got a bunch of other problems they're going to have to deal with.
Huge problems,
yeah, the Greens always have huge problems. There's a lot of why I'm a former one of them. But anyway,
it's why the Independents are doing well.
Yeah. Well, let's briefly there, because we do have a large Australian audience, to just quickly note, Greens policies and Greens platforms did incredibly well when they were detached from the Greens party.
Yeah.
So the Greens party needs to look at that.
when Labor picks up the Greens policies and platforms and runs with them, they do really well. But the Greens themselves don't.
But here in Canberra, Jesse Price nearly within 150 votes in an electorate took the seat of Bean.
From the Invisible Man.
From the Invisible Man, David Smith. But her platform was 100% Greens, but she did something the Greens could never dream of because she wasn't saddlebagged by the weight of all the Greens problems.
Next time he's going down because he does nothing. Anyway, anyway. Hopefully, Labor, with a large majority in the lower house, will push through their progressive agenda that they espoused while they were in opposition with the helps from the Greens in the Senate, rather than work with the Conservatives in the Senate to prop up the billionaires and go basically. The idea is that we're trying to say to the Labor politicians is, you've won, be bold, take this opportunity because who knows when you'll next get it. So
I'm willing to bet you they will not. But,
no, I agree. But this is the opportunity for them to be bold and put forward all the progressive ideas they espoused when they were in opposition to the Conservatives. To say, you should be doing such and such, and well, where is that now? But anyway, we'll hope. We'll keep you posted. All right. Worldwide TNT shortage.
This was an article I was not expecting to read. And we will, in the show notes that will be on totallytank.net. Come on, guys. You're already listening to us. Just set up the RSS and
RSS is where it's at, baby.
So what's really interesting here is that until 2022, all of the US TNT manufacturing for use in artillery shells was reliant on a Ukrainian factory that is inside the Russian zone of control.
Now, for those who don't know, when putting together a 155 round, it has two parts to it. You've got the propellant, which is mostly the nitrocellulose, and then you've got the high explosive, which is the RDX, basically the TNT, and which is the TNT part. Or is that, no, I'm pretty sure that's right. And what it is when you're building the nitrocellulose is the propellant. That has to be done in batches, and so is where most organisations, they say, right, we're going to build a batch of essentially cook up a batch of nitrocellulose and ship that off. I got an article the other day on YouTube from British Armed Forces buddy YouTube feed saying, yep, they've seen this issue for themselves, and they are looking to build their own process whereby they're no longer reliant upon overseas production of TNT and nitrocellulose and RDX. They're going to start building their own stuff in England. Wales, I think. And they're going to reduce the amount of nitrocellulose that they need for the propellant and mix in the RDX into that for the propellant. So you'll have less nitrocellulose reliance upon their propellant and more of the RDX in both the propellant and the explosive. And from that, they're not going to do it in batches, so it'll be a continuous cooking process. So I don't know, I haven't watched all of Breaking Bad, but I'm sure Walter White got into the idea of, rather than cooking batches, he just had a factory line of cooking meth, and I think that's what the Brits are going to do for their thing. And all this is in order to get around the politics, because Western countries aren't allowed to buy from certain countries like China or other countries that North Korea that produce the explosive material that they want to be able to mix in together and make their 155 rounds. The logistics of it, and in order to ship things over, and logistics and costs, so shipping things from certain places to other certain places, and then the supply chain issues of if you are buying your nitrocellulose and RDX and TNT from Brazil or other places, which is where they're looking at, if those ships aren't available and or you have huge tariffs on those things, hint, hint, if you have huge tariffs on those things, then they're not shipping to your country anymore, and therefore you're not getting the things you need to be able to make the 155 rounds that you want to be able to use in 2027, just in case something happens then.
But there's a problem also for America that any imports that are defense related have to be carried on American flagged ships. And in this day and age, that triples the cost of the shipping because mostly everyone wants to hire Filipinos who work for very cheap to run their ships.
I mean, all the ships are crewed by Filipinos, but they're flagged in the Marianas or wherever.
Yeah, but US flagging makes
Virgin Islands.
US flagging makes for a very expensive ship.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Yes. Now, India and Pakistan.
We haven't even mentioned that
the biggest dogfight since World War II.
Throwing missiles at each other and conducting civil defense drills. And hopefully that doesn't escalate further, because you know what? Two nuclear-armed countries who really want to get a beat on, and I mean, I think Trump came out the other day saying well, maybe they should, and to sort it out. And
well,
go.
But you do have the very serious issue that the Pakistani-owned Chinese-made equipment is outperforming expectations. There's been a lot of Indian, particularly their Rafale jets, shot down that they were not expecting. And also Turkish electronic warfare drones have been doing great work for the Pakistanis. So it comes back to, I keep trying to tell you people, that electronic warfare is really important and is in fact the future. Now, Rob, you've got one last thing you want to talk to everyone about.
Now, the Royal Navy, John. You say it's been in operation for 800 years?
I didn't Google it. But
no, I couldn't Google it because I don't got no reception in your in your dungeon down here.
Yeah.
All right, but anyway.
Sex dungeon, Rob. Sex dungeon.
I did not say that. I did not say that. Even though I can see the swords in the corner from here.
Look, ever since we moved in, no one has had sex down here, but the neighbours seem to think there's something going on here.
Anyway, for the first time in however many hundreds of years, the Royal Navy has a Royal Marine as the first Sea Lord. And that's, I think it's a bit of a thing that's happening. I'm going, what's going on there? How did the Royal Navy let this happen? All right. So,
well, they've got no ships left, aren't
they relying on the French aircraft carriers? They've got one of their own aircraft carriers?
They cannibalised the whole Navy to have the two aircraft carriers, which are also problematic because they've only got a destroyer's propulsion plant in a 65,000 ton hull.
But it was the idea that it might be a political appointment. They might be setting him up to fail. But the idea of a Royal Marine as the first Sea Lord, I'm again it. There you go.
I do wonder, it could well be he's just an extremely competent person, and as a result, the RN was just like, oh no, he's so great, we're not going to stand in the way. That can happen. That is possible. I mean, here in Australia, we had a naval aviator in Binskin who became he got to Chief of the Air Force. So when Australia wound down its naval aviation, he transferred over to the.
We still have the ability and training for it, but we just don't have the carriers or planes.
Yeah, but he transferred to the Air Force and became an air marshal, and I think became Chief of the Defence Force for a while there. So it's Alan's noting that the Royal Navy has more admirals than ships, and that is entirely
just like they have more horses than tanks.
Yeah, well, they keep. If you talk to an English tanker, they'll say, oh yeah, we would love to be on doing tank training every day of the week, but we only get 6 weeks on the training range, and the rest of the time we got to ride horses.
I was about to say, the rest of the time we're out fox hunting.
Yeah. So anyway, folks, we have loved having you with us. Thank you so much for hanging around.
Rob's
got something else to say.
We got to check the poll. Have people
bad.
learned? Have they learned?
No, they're wrong. They're just wrong.
All right, so
it's the wrongness
right,
we've
15
ever
of
done.
you have said the Type 97 Chiha was rubbish always versus a great tank for its time.
And you're wrong. You're just wrong.
10 tanks.
Ignorance of the masses. Having said that, if you had asked me, did Japan have a good medium tank in World War II, I would have said no.
No.
But I researched it, and then I was like, oh, wow. No, this tank actually did really well. But it was fundamentally a light tank.
It was a light tank, but it was the tank that turned up, and 10 of them beat the British in Malaya and took Singapore. All right, so yeah, there we go. Anyway, thank you
I'm not ready.
Not ready yet?
Yeah. No.
That's a good spaced episode for those who want to see it. And anyway.
Okay, we're ready now.
All right.
Okay.
Take care all, and we'll see you next month with a new tank, and we'll talk to you then.
See you guys.